Chapter 1. The Slaves on the Laughing Lion. The blue sea rolled in gentle waves, licking at the oak hull of the Laughing Lion. A salty breeze swept across the deck, lifting the damp strands of hair clinging to Quen's forehead. Hunched over, he gripped the fishing net with both hands, knuckles whitening from the strain. This was the 9th day since his transmigration. He was no longer the college student who sat before a computer, jungling with Shyvana and roaming Summoner's Rift. Now he was, Quen, a 13-year-old boy, son of a smith from a small town in Yiti by the Jade Sea. 3 months ago, the Dothraki horsemen had swept through like a plague of locusts, crushing his home and selling him through slave markets. In the end, he was bought by a Westerosi adventurer named Gerion Lannister, becoming the lowest of the low aboard the Laughing Lion, a ship bound for an uncertain fate. Gerion Lannister. That name alone was enough to sink Quen's heart to the bottom of the sea. Having read A Song of Ice and Fire, he knew well that this man was Tywin Lannister's younger brother. Yiti, the Dothraki, Volantis, Westeros. Other transmigrators became lords, princes, or knights squires. He, however, was a slave, a smith's son from Yiti who didn't even know where he would be tomorrow. From the bow came a sharp voice, thick with the accent of Volantis, breaking through his heavy thoughts. Gerion, how much longer until we reach Valyria? We've been drifting on this damn sea for half a month. Is something wrong with your charts? Bring them out and let everyone see, or who knows what tricks you're hiding. The speaker was a gaunt middle-aged man. Beneath his short, curly brown hair, a jagged rose-red scar cut diagonally from his forehead to the corner of his left eye, like an ugly centipede. His piercing gaze was fixed squarely on Gerion, who stood at the foredeck. Gerion Lannister didn't answer right away. His tall frame stood firm at the bow as he peered through a red copper Myrish lens tube, staring hard at the horizon as if he could pierce through the endless blue. After a moment, he lowered the tube, his blue eyes calm as still water as they turned toward the scarred man. Lend. The charts are sound. I spent over a decade obtaining them and won't hand them over so easily. If you want treasure, stop probing and follow my command. Otherwise. He paused, his gaze sweeping over Leonard's dark expression. This ship can sail without you. With that, Gerion turned and strode toward the captain's cabin, not sparing another glance. The sea wind tugged at the hem of Leonard's open leather coat, but it couldn't scatter the aura of malice and resentment surrounding him. He stared at Gerion's retreating back, the scar on his face twisting grotesquely in the sunlight. Quen kept his eyes down, mechanically hauling at the fishing net as if deaf to everything. This was the 17th such clash. Gerion's partner, never stopped trying to pry the secret out of him, the sea route leading to the ruins of Valyria. And Gerion, the youngest brother of Tywin Lannister, had set sail to recover his family's lost Valyrian steel sword, Brightroar, and the treasures of the ruins. Each time, he remained ever watchful. Quen searched his memories. If he recalled correctly, Gerion's fate was to vanish into the cursed smoking sea of Valyria. His chest tightened sharply. He hadn't even cleared the newbie village, and now he was about to be dragged into a hell-level dungeon like Valyria. Instinctively, he looked around for a way to escape, but the endless blue sky and sea trapped him in every direction. Then, without warning, a cold, piercing light burst deep within his mind. System. The shock froze Quen's body, his breath caught in his throat. Around him, the sailors continued their clamor, unaware of the slave boy's strange state in the corner. Quen sank his consciousness inward, and the panel, glowing with a soft but undeniable white light, appeared clearly before him. Host. Quen. Age. 13. Lifespan limit. 81 years. Dragon's soul. Oh, a certain chance to acquire Dragon's soul upon the death of magical entities. Magic. 0.500 passively absorbs magic from the air or actively from magical items. Passive skills. 1 Dragon Bloodline Purity. 0.05%. The death of magical entities grants a chance to acquire Dragon's soul. 100 Dragon soul equals 0.01% Bloodline Purity. Purity increases magic capacity, lifespan, physique, dragon flame strength, number of flame knights, and number of dragon soul guards. 2 True Dragon Physique, purity enhances physical strength in true dragon form. 3 Fire Affinity, purity enhances affinity within resistance to fire elements. Active skills. 1 Dragon Flame Breath, human form. 1 meter Fireball, 5 meters range, 1 magic per second. Dragon form. 5 meters Fireball, 25 meters range, 5 magic per second. 2 Blazing Inferno, human form. 1 meter Dragon Flame Armor, 2 magic per second. Dragon form. 5 meters blazing domain 10 magic per second. 3 Dragonblood Pact, forge a Dragonblood Pact with a human, making them an absolutely loyal Flame Knight. Grants Dragon Blood, reshapes their body. Number of pacts increases with purity. Flame Knights can revive the dead as Dragon Soul Guards, the number of which also increases with purity. Current Flame Knights. 1. Cost. 1000 magic each use. Ultimate skill. True Dragon's Descent. Transform into a 1 meter long True Dragon. Size increases with purity. Cost. 1000 magic to activate, 1 magic per second to maintain. Dragon. Power. The words roared through his soul like ancient war horns, sweeping away the shadows of his enslaved humiliation. But the cold numbers struck him like a bucket of seawater. Magic. 0.05. Forget unleashing skills, he couldn't even conjure a single spark. That alluring, True Dragon's Descent, demanded a full 1000 points just to activate. Quen felt the thin trace of magic in the air and stared at the stagnant pool on his panel, shaking his head in frustration. Relying on passive absorption. That would take forever. As for absorbing from magic items. Ridiculous. He was a slave with nothing to his name, not even a proper stick. In Dragon's Soul, the key to raising his bloodline purity, could only be gained from slain magical entities. If he had the strength to kill magical entities, would he still be here as a slave? Bitterness surged again. The cheat had arrived, yet its activation requirements were cruel enough to be despair. Just then, the heavy net in his hands suddenly jerked with a violent, almost frenzied force. The power was far beyond the thrashing of ordinary fish, yanking the unprepared Quen forward so hard he stumbled, his knees cracking against the slick deck. Yiti brat, didn't you eat? Pull harder. A sailor with a reeking beard and liquor on his breath cursed harshly, gritting his teeth as he hauled alongside him. A few others muttered curses as they rushed in to help. The net rose slowly, sloshing water and releasing an even heavier stench of fish. At the bottom, an abnormally large, violently twisting shape could be seen. When it was finally dragged onto the deck, exposed beneath the glaring sun, the sailors surrounding it let out a chorus of gasps, equal parts astonishment and unease. It was a monstrous fish. Nearly a meter long, its body was armored with thick dark green scales, their edges flashing with a cold metallic sheen. Its head was grotesque, packed with fine, saw-like teeth. Its 2 cloudy yellow eyes bulged outward like cheap glass marbles, dull and lifeless. The 7 hells. What in bloody hells is that? A young sailor from Westeros turned pale, stumbling back instinctively. A bastard from the Valyrian sea, uglier than the cheapest whore in Lee. The bearded sailor spat curses. Another seasoned hand drew the skinning knife from his belt, crouching low as he crept toward the thrashing monster. Quen's heart hammered in his chest. His eyes fixed on the fish's murky yellow orbs. Deep inside that filth, he thought he caught the faintest, twisted flicker of light. Could this thing be a magical entity? The thought jolted through him, and on his system panel, the cold, Dragon's Soul, 0 inches seemed to blaze to life. Just then, the sailor drove his knife down, killing the monster with 1 strike. From its corpse, a hazy sphere of light drifted free. Quen glanced around. None of the sailors reacted, they looked straight through it, as though it wasn't there at all. The orb floated briefly in the air, glowing faintly, before shooting straight into his body. Dragon's Soul +1. It was only a single point, nowhere near enough to raise his bloodline purity by even 0.01%, yet the impact sent waves crashing through Quen's mind. This thing actually gave Dragon's Soul. So that's it. The system had said, the death of magical entities may yield Dragon's Soul, but it never said he had to strike the killing blow himself. It was like a door opening in the dark, only for reality's iron wall to slam it shut again. Only creatures infused with magic could provide Dragon's Soul. And where was he supposed to find magical entities? His gaze flicked from the carcass at his feet to the distant, endless horizon, his whole body tensing. That was the ruins of Valyria. If even a fish from waters near the cursed land carried a trace of magic, enough to count as a magical entity, then the ruins themselves must be crawling with them, sources of bloodline power waiting to be claimed. Compared to fleeing and drowning in the endless sea, setting foot in Valyria to strengthen his bloodline was at least a path he could see and grasp. On deck, the sailors were still bickering, whether to cook the monster fish or toss it back into the waves. No one noticed the boy from Yiti in the corner. In his eyes, once dulled by numbness and resignation, a spark of hope flared for the very first time. 12 comments 0 vote. Chapter 2. The Face Worm. After 15 agonizing days and nights, the Laughing Lion finally sailed into the land forsaken by the gods. The sea churned and boiled, reeking of acrid rot. A dense, chalk-white fog rose from the water, curling around the hull and blotting out the sky. The air was scorching and oppressive, every breath felt like swallowing burning sand. Smoking sea. A sailor's teeth clattered, his face pale as ash. In the mist, shadowy outlines writhed in the pallid glow, some like toppled spires, others like the bones of titanic beasts. From the shrouded islands, all around came eerie, blood-curdling shrieks, drilling into ears and tearing at nerves. Guards' hands trembled around their spears, bowmen's knuckles whitened on their strings. Even Scarface Lend, whose gaze was always sharp and merciless, showed a flicker of fear for the first time. Days later, the plague came. At first, a few sailors grew pale as corpses dragged from the sea. Then their skin flushed raw red, lips swelling purple, eyes sinking deep, with dark veins bulging and twisting beneath their flesh. They burned with fever, vomited, and suffered ceaseless diarrhea. Their bodies stank of sweet, charred meat as their cries of despair echoed through the lower decks. Throw them overboard. Gerion didn't spare them a glance as he gave the order. The sick were hurled into the boiling, gray-yellow waters, swallowed at once by the frothing waves. The crew's numbers dwindled sharply. Those who remained carried only numbness, or madness, in their eyes. Only Quen silently counted the numbers flashing on his panel. Magic. +10. +15. +25. Just as he expected. The ruins of Valyria were thick with magic, the air's concentration far surpassing the outside world. A natural cradle for magical creatures. The deeper they pressed into the smoking sea, the faster the numbers climbed. On the 10th day, they froze at magic. 455 hundredths. At dawn on the 11th day, the anchor sank into shallow waters lined with jagged black reefs. Gerion narrowed his eyes at the hazy shore, his command crushing the crew's last shred of hope. Lower the boats. Land. When his boots hit the wet, searing gray-brown sand, Lend finally cracked under the terror in his chest. From the first day in the smoking sea, he had felt as though a giant hand was squeezing his heart, leaving him gasping. His years as a sellsword had hardened his will, but they were no defense against the horrors of Valyria's ruins. He wanted to run. He grabbed Gerion by the collar of his leather armor, the rose-red scar on his face flushing with rage. Madman. Back in Volantis you swore you'd find the sword, you swore you'd succeed. And now. Look around you. This is hell, not treasure. I see only plagues that devour men, monsters howling in the shadows. Do you want treasure, or do you want us all buried here with you? Gerion brushed his hand away and pulled a roll of Charadej parchment from his cloak. Open your eyes, Eagle, of House Maegor. He nudged aside loose ash with his boot, revealing a massive black stone slab beneath. It seemed so tight a blade could not slip through. This is the Dragonlord. Follow it, and you'll find the Valyrian steel you dream of. Lend Maegor's breath caught. The map depicted Valyria in its entirety. He'd wager it was worth a fortune in gold. Blood rushed to his head, greed flashing nakedly in his eyes. But the thought of Gerion flanked by dozens of guards cooled him, and he forced himself to study the parchment. It showed their party on the western shore of Valyria's island. Beneath their feet stretched the marble-paved Dragonlord. Follow it east, and they would reach the fabled city itself. Visions of vaults brimming with Valyrian steel weapons and armor surged through Leonid's mind. The shame of his cadet branch birth and his hunger for treasure drowned out his fear. He spat to the side, silent consent. Gerion gave the order, and the company marched onto the Dragonlord. The colossal stone blocks, even after 4 centuries, still displayed craftsmanship so perfect it mocked the crude works of later ages. On either side, twisted dead trees clawed at the gray sky, while fragments of gravined marble lay half-buried in scorched earth. The air reeked only of sulfur and ash. Quen trailed at the rear, his cold eyes scanning the wasteland, every step pressed tight against his nerves. The faint trace of bloodline within his body granted him sharp senses. He could feel something moving deep within the thick fog, its hungry gaze licking at their backs, yet it never struck. Quen dared not relax, keeping his focus razor sharp. He was certain that if some hideous monster leapt from the withered forest, he would be the last to fall back, standing guard before the others. After less than half a day's march, Gerion and Lend halted the group, announcing they would camp here. Sure enough, something went wrong. While setting up camp, a Lizarian slave vanished into the mist along the forest's edge. His companions cried out in Lizarian, begging Gerion to send men to search. Gerion coldly refused. Lend leaned close to him, voice low and trembling. Gerion, you've noticed it, haven't you? They're following us. The things in the Deadwood Forest. Those monsters have been on our trail since we landed this morning. Years as a sellsword had sharpened his instincts, he had long known something lurked within the Deadwood. Which means there aren't enough of them, and they're not strong enough. Otherwise, they'd have struck already. Gerion's tone was careless, his blue eyes gleaming faintly in the dusk, his steadiness brimming with confidence. Leonard's mouth twitched stiffly. Inwardly he cursed Gerion's arrogance, his voice sharp with scorn. Sometimes I can't tell if you're truly certain or just running your mouth. They're weighing their prey. Think, are they jackals, or are they lions? Can you swear you'll escape their jaws? Is that so, Lend? A pack of starving beasts scared Maegor's eagle into pissing himself. I'll tell you this, Valyrian treasure is worth the risk. If they're jackals, I'll roast them for supper. If they're lions, I'll gladly bring my brother at Castley Rock a fine Valyrian pelt. Or would you rather pick over Carrion at the ruins, edge? Don't you want to see Valyria for yourself? To see what kind of power brought the mighty Valyrian civilization to its end? Maybe we'll find weapons fit for our hands. Maybe we'll discover dragon eggs and be remembered in taverns from the Seven Kingdoms to the free cities. Lend fell silent. He knew his strengths lay on the battlefield and in the arena, in blades and combat, not in sparring with Gerion's words. Yet, he had to admit, Gerion's words stirred something in him. Greed whispered to him, drawing him toward Valyria and its treasures. Gold, gems, weapons, even dragon eggs, he would welcome them all. Night soon fell, and the party was forced to halt again. Gerion forbade the lighting of fires, wary of attracting hostile eyes. But before long, a shrill, inhuman scream tore through one corner of the camp. A sailor was burning, engulfed in a strange, bright yellow flame. His skin melted like wax, dripping as his flesh sizzled in the fire. He rolled and writhed like a living torch, casting the tents around him in a hellish glow. Gerion came running, fury already boiling. Before he could even grasp what had happened, he roared, "Put it out! Quickly!" But his command was swallowed by the man's wails. The sound was so piercing, so full of agony, that it made every soul present shiver. No one dared approach the flames. One of Gerion's guards stepped forward and explained what had happened. An old sailor had suddenly ignited from within as they set up camp. That was how he had come to this. The story darkened Gerion's face at once. Quen, standing among the crowd, realized instantly, this was disturbingly similar to what had once happened to Princess Arya. At last the fire burned itself out, leaving behind a curled, blackened husk. Thin wisps of smoke carried the stench of scorched flesh. Silence hung heavy. Then, hiss, hiss. A sickening scraping came from within the charred corpse. Quen's suspicion was confirmed. With a wet pop, a crimson maggot as thick as an infant's arm pushed through the burnt ribs. Its slimy body was embedded with a distorted, weeping human face. Beneath it, 4 small limbs clawed frantically at the bone fragments, greedily sucking. Then came a second. A third. Disgusting things. Lend, snapping at the sight, lost all reason. With vengeful fury, he drew his sword and hacked down. The blade struck true, slicing a human-faced maggot clean in two. Thick, lava-like crimson pus sprayed violently into the air. Don't get close, you fool. Stop. Gerion's warning came half a heartbeat too late. The maggots splattered with the foul blood twisted their weeping faces into masks of venomous hatred. They reared their swollen bodies high, their hissing cries rising into a shrill, glass-scraping screech. A flicker of satisfaction crossed Leonard's face. Whoosh! Several streams of sticky pale yellow fire shot from the maggots' mouths, striking his face with unerring precision. Arg! An inhuman scream split the night. Lend became the second human torch, thrashing wildly. He clawed helplessly at his face as flesh carbonized and peeled away under the yellow flames, exposing stark white bone. Staggering, engulfed in searing fire, he lurched toward Gerion, the only one still composed, charred fingers outstretched, a desperate plea rasping from his throat. His men-at-arms exchanged helpless glances, torn between rushing to him and knowing there was nothing they could do. Gerion stepped back, his expression unchanging, blue eyes colder than steel. Loose. Thwip. 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 Arrows rained like locusts, nailing the remaining maggots, and Leonard's blackened, writhing corpse, to the scorched ground. The insects twitched as pus seeped into the earth. Unseen, a dozen faint crimson lights rose from the carcasses, drifting like spirits through the shaken crowd before vanishing into Quen's chest. Dragon Soul plus 140. Dragon Bloodline Purity. 0.06%. Maximum magic increased to 640. Current magic. 466/140ths. The cold notification seared through Quen like molten fire. He bit back the growl rising in his throat, driving his nails deeper into his palms. Then came another shift. At a single icy glance from Gerion, Leonard's guards had their throats slit from behind by their former comrades. The corpses were dragged into the withered woods, burned and buried hastily, their blood greedily swallowed by the blackened soil. With their master dead, they'd try to escape. Killing them keeps our ship safe. Gerion gave the surviving sailors a curt explanation. His merciless gaze swept over the cowering slaves and sailors, the threat plain without words. Hidden among them, Quen seethed. Even as joy at gaining the dragon's soul burned in him, he cursed this Lannister endlessly. This Lannister had no bottom line, no conscience, ruthless, merciless, the very image of Tywin's cold methods perfected. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 3. The Monsters Attack. The next day, the death march resumed. They pressed deeper along the Dragonroad, where ruins of cities stretched before them. Gray-white marble and black basalt lay toppled together, charred beams stabbing through the fog. The sailors and slaves marched in silence, broken only by the crunch of boots grinding brittle bones underfoot. Quen's thoughts, however, drifted to fragments of memory from his past life about the ruins of Valyria. Legend said that deep within the smoking sea there were 2 Valyrian cities, Oros and Tyria, where survivors might still live. He had no idea where they were now, though at least he had seen no signs of life nearby. Quen would wager Gerion, that madman, had no intention of seeking Oros or Tyria. He was surely aiming straight for Valyria itself. The Valyrian capital lay at the heart of the 14 Flames, where the truth of the civilization's fall remained buried. And there, something unspeakably dangerous surely awaited. Quen hesitated. Should he take the chance to slip away? At the very least, he couldn't afford to march boldly into Valyria alongside the main force. Yet what held him back was doubt. Did he have enough magic to survive alone in a land filled with danger? For now, the ultimate skill of dragon transformation was beyond his reach, requiring at least 1,000 magic. What he could use were only Dragonflame Breath and Blazing Inferno. Would those 2 skills really be enough to keep him alive on his own? He felt uncertain. He hadn't had the system for long, and Gerion's hunger for treasure was far greater than he had imagined. He couldn't gamble his life so recklessly. After much thought, Quen made his decision. If, before reaching Valyria, he couldn't gather enough dragon soul and magic to unlock the ultimate skill, he would slip away. Lost in thought, he was jolted back by commotion ahead. The group had halted in a plaza scattered with massive building foundations. Before their ragged breaths could settle, a chilling sound tore through the air. Yeah. A shriek, sharp as nails on glass and far too cruel to be human, exploded from the dense woods to their right. Everyone's hair stood on end. Then came the sound of dry branches snapping under immense force, scraping together as the fog churned. Something moved among the twisted trunks. You. Go look. Gerion's brow furrowed as he pointed at the guard nearest the woods. The man's face drained of color, his lips trembling. Under Gerion's cold gaze, he had no choice but to grip his spear tight and edge step by step toward the wall of dead trees. He was just a few paces from the edge when, crash! A dark teal shadow burst from the branches, carrying the stench of rot. It slammed into the guard, hurling him to the ground. Cries of alarm rang out as the others finally saw the creature clearly. It had a hunched, man-like torso, but its body was armored in heavy, crocodile-dark scales. Its limbs were grotesquely long and twisted, each ending in black talons that gleamed with a cold light. Its bald skull was crowned not with hair but with ridges of horn-like growths. 2 blood-red vertical pupils burned in its face, filled with hatred and hunger. Its gaping maw, split back to the ears and lined with rows of jagged fangs, poured streams of thick yellow drool that splattered to the ground like a waterfall. Shish. Drool landed on the fallen guard's face, releasing a hiss of acrid smoke. His skin melted like hot wax, exposing the stark white of his cheekbone. The man screamed in unbearable agony. Loose. Gerion roared. Arrows whistled down like rain. Clang, clang, clang. Sparks burst from the creature's scales. The arrowhead struck with the ring of steel, only to bounce off or snap uselessly. A cold dread gripped the group. The monster's scales were harder than iron. Charge. Cut it down. Gerion bellowed at his guards. But the soldiers, men who were usually sharp and disciplined, felt as though their legs had turned to lead. Not one dared move forward. In that frozen stalemate, another desperate scream rose from behind the slaves. The crowd turned in horror. A smaller monster had slipped down from the top of a massive dead tree, clinging like a lizard. No one had noticed it until now. With skeletal claws, it casually pried open a slave's skull. Lowering its mouth to the red and white mess inside, it drank greedily, emitting a nauseating slurping sound. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The sound of scraping, sharp enough to chill the marrow, came from every direction. Within the fog-choked forest, pairs of blood-red pupils lit up in clusters. Dark blue, ashen gray, iron black. Scales of every shade flickered between the branches. They stepped out together, hunched silhouettes forming a shifting wall of scales in the mist, encircling the tiny company upon the ashen Dragonlord. Those blood-red eyes locked onto every scrap of living flesh. Quen's heart sank. He had thought the things lurking in the forest were no more than beasts, jackals perhaps, too wary of their numbers to attack. Now he realized his mistake. In Valyria, common sense was useless. Here, reality punished arrogance. Could they run? Quen was no foolhardy youth. The moment the creatures had shown themselves, he'd already moved to shield those around him, ready to slip away at the first chance. Survival came first. Nothing outweighed his own life. But the thought of fleeing was crushed at once. Behind them, the same heavy, rasping breaths could be heard, more of the creatures. They were surrounded. Behind lay the devouring black forest, before them the churning fog like a gray sea. Quen's grip tightened around his scavenged wooden stick, knuckles whitening. His focus sank into the hidden realm only he could see, the strange panel. Magic power, 500. In human form, dragonflame breath drained 1 point per second, blazing inferno drained 2. Enough perhaps to kill a handful. But in the shifting mist ahead, countless figures emerged, far too many for him to face. At least his dragon bloodline's passive skill, true dragon physique, granted him raw strength like never before. He felt the power surging in his muscles. Even in human shape, he wielded brute force that rivaled many. He kept his eyes on Gerion and his men, already planning. First, seize a real weapon. Then, with sheer strength, hold the beasts back long enough to dive into the forest when the battle turned chaotic. If they chased him, he would use the trees for cover and unleash dragonflame breath to hold them at bay. That was the best plan. But in the face of death, even thought was a luxury. A shriek tore apart the silence. The monsters surged forward, not probing, but in a wave of hunger and frenzy that crashed over the outer ranks. Screams followed at once. Sailors and slaves, armed with nothing but bare hands or crude clubs, were paper-thin before the scaled creatures. A young sailor went down, hooked claws ripping his linen tunic and flesh apart. He kicked in vain before the monster's jaws snapped shut on his neck, spraying blood across the ashen ground. Another slave swung his wooden club. It struck the beast's back with a dull thud, leaving not even a mark. The strike only enraged it. With a sweep of its claws, half the man's face, eye and all, was torn away. In the chaos of slaughter, only Gerion Lannister and his guards held like stone. The clash of steel rang sharp and constant. The trained men closed ranks swiftly, backs pressed together, forming a tight circle. At its front stood Gerion himself, clad in polished half-plate over chainmail, his gaze unwavering. Hold steady. Aim for the joints. Gerion shouted the command. His sword hacked down at the joint of a lunging monster's foreleg. With a sharp crack, the dark green shell split open, exposing gray, rotting sinew and black, sap-like blood that seeped out foul and thick. The creature shrieked in pain, its movements faltering for a heartbeat before it surged forward again, throwing itself back into the fight. Meanwhile, Quen was searching for his chance. His sharp gaze caught sight of a guard locked in combat with an unusually massive beast, too distracted to notice anything else. Quen ducked low and dashed in, fingers closing with precision around the hilt of the spare longsword at the guard's waist. He recognized the scabbard's worn marks. It had belonged to Lend, the unlucky man devoured by red maggots the night before. The cold hilt felt heavy, reeking of blood, but it gave him a grim sense of reassurance. Almost at once, a wave of stench hit him. One of the monsters abandoned the wounded slave at its feet and hurled itself at this new threat carrying steel. Quen had no time for stances. Relying only on instinct and the flood of strength in his body, he gripped the sword with both hands and swung upward with everything he had. Clang! The shriek of clashing steel rang out. The recoil numbed his palms, his arms shuddering under the shock. His blade struck the monster's hooked claw as it blocked, sparks bursting into the air. The creature staggered back under the blow, its ghostly green eyes flashing with what looked like surprise. Quen himself stumbled half a step, his chest roiling with surging blood. Such power. He could feel clearly how much his body had changed. This was nothing like the frail body he had once lived in, it was the gift of the true dragon physique. But in that same instant, he saw his weakness. He had strength, but no skill. His swings were crude, wide arcs, every strike consuming his full effort, draining him fast. He fought nothing like Gerion's veterans, who parried with precision, turned aside force, and probed for weak points with efficient economy. And yet, that very clumsy, jarring style made him stand out in the chaos of the battlefield. Gerion Lannister's emerald eyes swept the melee between sword strikes. He saw the black-haired, dark-eyed eastern slave driving a monster back with brute strength alone, and for the first time, his calm wavered. Where did this Yiti man gain such power? It made no sense. Eastern slaves weren't rare in the free cities, but never had Gerion heard of one with such skill, or the will to fight like this. Chapter 4. A Pyrrhic Victory. Quen had no time to worry about noble eyes on him. All his focus was locked on the monster lunging at him again and again. After several fruitless strikes, he gave up on trying to land a killing blow in one swing. Instead, he began looking for flaws and weak points. Earlier, Gerion had used his combat experience to direct the men-at-arms to target the joints. The guards followed his lead, hacking desperately at those same spots. But even with wounded joints, the creatures fought on with unbroken savagery and speed. Quen shifted tactics. Instead of going for the joints, he aimed for their more vulnerable heads. Another monster hurled itself at him, its foul stench washing over his face. With a roar, Quen stopped slashing wildly and drove all his strength into his arms, thrusting the steel blade straight toward the center of its eerie green eyes. Squelch. The blade punched through its eye with a sickening pop and buried itself deep in the skull. Thick, black blood spurted from the socket, spraying across Quen's face in a nauseating splatter. The monster shrieked, thrashing in agony, its hooked claws tearing at the air. Quen clung to the hilt, staggering under its violent spasms. Biting down hard, he shoved downward with every ounce of strength he had, forcing the sword through and cutting sideways. The steel tore halfway through its neck, leaving the head hanging by a shred of flesh. At last gravity did the rest, and the gruesome head dropped off completely, rolling across the ash. The twitching body collapsed with a heavy thud. The bloody, brutal sight stalled the battlefield. Everyone had just watched a slave kill a monster. Strike the eyes. The eyes are their weakness. Gerion Lannister's shout snapped his struggling men-at-arms back into focus. He led by example, seizing an opening. With his left steel bracer, he knocked aside a claw meant to kill him, ignoring the shock that ran down his arm. Driving forward, he rammed his sword point into the monster's eye. Brain fluid burst out as the beast fell dead. The sight lifted his men's spirits. They began working together, deliberately creating openings for one another to stab at the eyes. Soon, several more beasts were brought down, collapsing in bloody heaps. But the tide had not turned. The monsters still vastly outnumbered them. Worse, the slaves and sailors were nearly gone, unarmed, unarmored, slaughtered like lambs. Screams and the sound of flesh tearing filled the air, the stench of blood so heavy it choked the breath. Lord. One guard, his face streaked with black blood, shouted urgently at Gerion between blocks. Give the spare swords to the slaves. Let them fight. If not, we'll be bled dry here. He meant the weapons left behind by fallen guards. Gerion didn't falter. He shoved back a monster with a sweep of his blade, but his blue-green eyes locked on Quen, the black-haired slave wrenching a sword free from another beast's corpse. The eerie calm in that gaze sent a chill down Gerion's spine. An Eastern slave, with such strength, holding steel, having seen him deal with the sick crew and Leonard's men, what would he do next? A dark thought struck Gerion. No. His command cut like iron. Those maggots are dead weight. They'll only add to the chaos. Kill the beasts, our men are enough. Before the words were finished, he was already plunging back into the fray, making his stance clear with steel. The guards exchanged looks, conflict flickering across their faces. But years of drilling and the crushing weight of discipline pressed them into obedience. Not all of them, however, could strangle that faint spark of pity. Amid the chaos, seizing the moment when Gerion was tangled with two beasts and his sight blocked, several guards slipped daggers from their belts or snatched up fallen blades, hurling them quickly to the feet of the nearest slaves and sailors. Pick them up. Fight these monsters with us. The instinct to survive crushed fear. Several dying slaves and sailors summoned the last of their strength, scrambling on hands and knees toward the fallen weapons. Cold steel met their palms, and in their desperate eyes a faint spark of hope flickered to life. With hoarse roars, they swung the unfamiliar blades and clubs, throwing themselves at the nearest monsters like cornered beasts, their lives buying the guards a moment's relief. Quen, however, had slipped into a strange state of focus. Killing 3 of the creatures had not only given him a clearer grasp of the strength born of dragonblood, but also a strange kind of feedback. Each time a monster died, dragon soul seeped into his body. It trickled like a stream, flowing into the vast lake within his consciousness that marked the limit of his magic. 0.08%. The number pulsed in his mind. He had slain 3, Gerion's men 5. 8 in total, enough to raise his bloodline purity by 0.08% and expand his magic capacity by 800. One of these monsters held 10 times the power of last night's grotesque red maggots. The discovery thrilled him. If he could keep hunting such beasts, his bloodline purity would soar. But just as he was calculating, the battlefield shifted. Scree! A sharp cry split the air, echoing from deep within the forest. It was nothing like the chaotic roars before. It was a command, a horn's call. Every monster froze mid-attack. For an instant, confusion flickered in their glowing green eyes. Then, as one, they wheeled about and fled, racing into the withered forest even faster than they had come. In a blink, they were gone, leaving only mangled corpses behind. Leaning on his sword, Quen panted heavily, eyes fixed on the woods. His chest hammered. That had been a signal. Something was commanding these monsters. A stronger beast. Or some unknown force. A thought crept in, absurd, yet chilling enough to freeze his spine. Could it be human? He had no time to dwell on it. Before the last beast's tail vanished into the trees, Gerion Lannister's cold voice rang out. Surround them. Clang. Steel scraped in perfect unison. The 12 surviving guards, wounded but drilled, moved at once. They closed ranks with flawless discipline, forming a ring of steel, sword points glinting coldly at the battlefield's center. Only 5 remained inside, Quen among them. 3 slaves barely able to stand, and 2 sailors drenched in blood. They gripped the weapons they had just claimed, their hands shaking uncontrollably. Back to back, they faced the Lannister guards, men who moments ago had fought beside them, now glaring with killing intent. Gerion stood just outside the ring, eyes like ice. His emerald gaze swept his men slowly. Which of you disobeyed my order and threw swords to that filth? Step forward. The 4 who had done so blanched at once. They traded glances, fear and hesitation plain in their eyes. Under Gerion's cold, soul-piercing stare, they finally lowered their heads and stepped out, one by one, until they stood at the inner edge of the ring. Pick up your weapons, Gerion commanded, and kill those who took your pity. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 5. The Judgment. The moment the words fell, the battlefield went deathly silent. Not only did the slaves and sailors cast desperate looks, but even the 4 men-at-arms who had stepped forward snapped their heads up, their eyes wide with disbelief and horror. One younger guard's lips trembled as he forced out the last of his courage. Esser, they are. Swish. Gerion didn't give him the chance to finish. His longsword slipped with perfect precision through the narrow gap between helmet and gorget, slicing clean across the throat. The young guard's head flew skyward, his face still frozen in shock. Ah! The remaining 3 guards recoiled in terror at the bloody scene, a strangled cry escaping their throats. Whatever pity had lingered in their eyes was swept away by the madness of survival. Shaking, nearly sobbing, they still raised their swords without hesitation and hacked down at the 4 wounded, despairing slaves and sailors before them. In an instant, the 4 fell lifeless into spreading pools of blood. Gerion didn't spare the corpses a glance. His cold eyes turned on the 3 men-at-arms who had just carried out his order, their chests heaving with ragged breaths. Kill them as well. His finger pointed at the 3 who had obeyed him only moments ago. The 8 remaining guards froze. The command struck them like a hammer blow to the chest. Killing unarmed slaves, they could stomach that. But now, to kill their own brothers in arms. For the first time, hesitation gripped the hands that held their blades. Then Gerion's gaze swept across them, cold as an abyssal sea. In that instant, the fear of death and the iron weight of Lannister obedience crushed any bond of comradeship. One of them growled low in his throat. Blades hissed through the air, plunging into the backs of the unsuspecting 3. The rest followed with clenched jaws. Screams ripped out at once. The 3 were run through from behind, eyes bulging in disbelief as they looked down at bloodied sword tips bursting from their chests, before collapsing into the muck. Only then did Gerion stride forward at a measured pace, his gaze sweeping the 8 who remained. Their faces were splattered with gore, their eyes filled with terror and numbness. His voice cut like steel. On Valyria's ruins, beneath the banner of House Lannister, cast aside your worthless mercy. Your swords strike only where I command. Defy me, and remember their fate. At last his cold eyes fixed on the lone figure still standing at the center of the circle, Quen. Quen drew a deep breath. He still gripped the steel blade tightly, its tip angled to the ground. His clothes were in tatters, his body drenched in blood, yet deep in his black eyes burned a strange calm, edged with sharp vigilance. That unsettling composure made Gerion Lannister, long accustomed to fear and pleading, pause with a flicker of doubt. Come with me. Kill this one. He stole a guard's sword. He'll be trouble. Gerion lifted his blood-stained blade, the tip leveled squarely at Quen, his voice laced with caution. The 8 guards instantly shifted stance, blades snapping up, all points aimed at Quen as the circle tightened. Quen frowned inwardly. He had underestimated how far Gerion Lannister's ruthlessness would go. He had hoped to conserve his precious magic, not waste it on these men. But now it seemed he had no choice. Fresh from battle, his body craved time to recover, so for the moment, he would stall. Meeting Gerion's gaze head-on, Quen spoke in the common tongue of Westeros. Lord, why must you drive us all to the end? Gerion's advance froze. For the first time, surprise flickered across his cold, rigid face as his eyes swept over Quen. You speak the common tongue. And fluently, no less. Who are you? A slave from Yiti, how could that be? Quen cut him off. Lord, I am indeed a slave from Yiti. As for the common tongue, I learned it during the long voyage, by listening, by watching, little by little. Hey! Gerion gave a short, cold laugh. Only bastards who skulk in the dark learn to survive like rats in the shadows. You saw how I deal with those who defy me, with useless trash. You stole that sword from my dead men to cling to life until now. From the moment you took it, every breath you've drawn has been a debt to House Lannister. Every second, the interest piles higher. And now, you must pay, with your life. His words tightened around Quen like a noose. Quen's chest sank with heaviness. He truly could not understand why this Gerion Lannister was so unhinged. Coldly, he answered. Debt. I don't recall owing you anything. From Volantis onward, you never treated us as men. And your own guards, you toyed with them like pets, tormenting them at your whim. You enjoy that feeling of control, don't you? But, Lord, one day, you may find yourself paying for that cruelty. Gerion's face twisted at the black-haired slave's taunt. Never had he seen such defiance from one of his kind. Fury surged through him, veins bulging as he spat, sharp-tongued brat. In the 7 kingdoms, someone like you would have been left to rot in some reeking gutter, a meal for rats. Maybe other houses would spare you, but I am a Lannister. And Lannisters. Quen's lips curved into a half-mocking smile. And Lannisters always pay their debts, isn't that so? By now, his resolve was set. He would leave none of them alive. Even if it meant burning through what little magic remained, he would not allow this cursed Lannister to walk away. The words struck Gerion Lannister like a thunderclap from a clear sky. He froze. A lowborn slave from far off Yiti, an ant who had just been struggling under monster claws, had spoken a saying more famous than his family's own words, hear me roar. Impossible. What could it mean? A storm of thoughts raged through his mind. Memories long buried clawed their way back, and his gaze on Quen changed utterly. Quen caught the violent flicker of doubt in his eyes and opened his mouth to press further. When suddenly, screech. From the horizon, out of the roiling crimson-lit clouds, an otherworldly howl erupted, so shrill and terrible it seemed to tear the heavens apart. 5 comments 0 vote. Chapter 6. The Escape. The sound didn't come from one direction, it was as if the whole sky itself was wailing in agony. Everyone instinctively clutched their ears, bodies curling in pain. The noise cut deeper than fear, striking at the rawest core of instinct. Then came a colossal shadow, plunging from the heavens with a shriek that tore the very air apart. Quen snapped his head up, pupils contracting to pinpricks. A bird. No, a beast. A monstrous bird, vast enough to suffocate the sky, ripped through the leaden clouds and dove straight at them. Its wings stretched 100 feet, blotting out what little light remained and throwing the blood-soaked earth into a deeper darkness. But its body wasn't feathered. Instead, it was cloaked in long, dense plumage that shimmered with a purplish-red metallic sheen, whipping like blades in the gale its dive conjured. Most terrifying of all, it had 3 heads. Each the size of a horse's body, covered in the same purplish-red, horned scales. 3 pairs of eyes glowed with a murderous hunger. Then, 3 jagged beaks, each lined with saw-toothed fangs, gaped wide at once. The air split with a deafening shriek, and a storm of foul, sulfur-laden wind slammed down, as if to swallow every living thing whole. Run. Survival crushed every other thought. How could Quen waste another heartbeat on Gerion? Dragon blood-honed reflexes carried him, legs coiling, then exploding with force, as he sprang off the ground like an arrow loosed from its string. Before the shadow could engulf him, he tore across the field, sprinting headlong toward the nearest wall of twisted, gnarled deadwood. Gravel, slick with blood, made every step treacherous. His ears rang with the screams of men-at-arms, the bird's shrill dive, the thunder of wings tearing the sky, and the sickening rip of flesh behind him. He didn't dare look back. He could picture it too clearly. Lannister half-plate armor, so proudly worn, shredding under claws as if it were parchment. Gerion Lannister, how long could that cold, selfish mask endure before such absolute power? For an instant, bitter satisfaction flickered in Quen's chest, only to drown beneath the flood of raw survival instinct. He ran, weaving frantically through the thickets of dead trees. The sulphurous fog was so dense it pressed against his skin, visibility no more than 5 paces. Each stride plunged him deeper into unknown terrors. He didn't know how long he fled, only that, at last, the shrieks and dying screams faded into the distance, smothered by mist and silence. He stopped, chest heaving, and scanned the dead stillness around him. Safe, at least for now. Exhaling hard, Quen's mind sharpened with a new thought. The way those scaled beasts had retreated earlier, so sudden, so orderly, had they sensed the purple-winged horror's approach? Were they fleeing a greater predator? The realization chilled him. The monsters of Valyria had a cunning that went far beyond what he'd imagined. He forced the thought aside, only for rage to surge back, burning hot. Damn Gerion. Damn that Lannister. His teeth ground as he cursed in silence. He had only taken a dead man's sword, fighting to survive. Yet to that golden-haired noble, the fact he was a slave meant he wasn't even allowed that small defiance. Was he supposed to bare his neck like a lamb at slaughter? Worse still, Gerion had cut down his own guards who had shown the faintest spark of mercy, discarding them as if they were no more than broken tools. Even those sworn to his family's service were pawns, nothing more. That kind of cruelty was colder than any monster's claws. Quen branded that icy face into memory. Then, regret struck. He had stalled Gerion only to buy time, to regain strength. The bird's arrival had ruined his chance to silence every witness. And though it seemed the beast might have claimed Gerion's head for him, there was no guarantee. Gerion could still survive. Quen's gaze hardened. If Gerion lived through this, then next time, he would repay him in blood. He shoved all stray thoughts aside. Survival came first. How to endure this cursed land, how to gather more dragon's soul, those were the only questions that mattered. Splash, splish, splash. The sound of running water drifted suddenly from the fog less than 10 paces to his left. Quen tightened his grip on the stolen steel sword, raising the tip slightly across his chest, every muscle primed to strike. There was no one else here. If danger appeared, he would call upon the system's power without hesitation. Step by step, he moved, his figure melding with the mist like a ghost as he crept toward the source of the sound. The fog parted ever so slightly, and what he saw made his breath hitch. A small pool, no more than 10 paces across, lay hidden in the deadwood's embrace. The water wasn't clear but milky white, faintly boiling, with streams of tiny bubbles rising steadily from below. And at its edge sat a maiden, no older than 12. Her back was to him. Long silver-gold hair spilled down like flowing moonlight, gleaming softly even beneath the ashen sky. Her skin was pale to the point of translucence, like the finest white jade, glowing faintly in the rising steam. Her slender waist, rounded shoulders, and long, graceful legs were bare to the air, as if some water spirit from ancient myth had stepped into the mortal world. With delicate jade-white hands, she trailed her fingers through the steaming pool, stirring gentle ripples across its surface, her face calm and serene. Even through the fog, her beauty was enough to make any man's heart pound. She radiated a vitality like a dew-kissed bud at dawn, pure and mesmerizing, drawing Quen's gaze until he nearly forgot the peril of this cursed land. But when the maiden seemed to sense something and turned her head, Quen felt a chill rush from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. His breath caught sharply. Her face was half angel, half demon. The left side was flawless, as though carved by the gods themselves. Smooth, unblemished skin, a delicate nose, full lips. Most striking was the eye, a deep violet gem, glimmering with a light like the stars, breathtaking in its beauty, so perfect it seemed unreal. The right side, however, was born of hell. Dense, hardened scales spread across her cheek like twisted vines. The eye there burned the same violet hue, but its pupil was a cold, reptilian slit. Scales. A vertical pupil. That side of her face was identical to the monstrosities that had nearly wiped them out not long ago. But those creatures had clouded, frenzied eyes, their minds consumed by bloodlust and madness, reduced to beasts that knew only how to kill and devour. This maiden was different. Her left face was serene and beautiful, her actions deliberate, human, bathing in the eerie, steaming spring with quiet grace. The life force flowing from her was vivid, unmistakably alive, something those shambling abominations could never possess. Could she be one of the survivors of Valyria's doom? Quen's mind leapt to memories of others who bore such half-twisted visages, Shireen Baratheon, cursed with grayscale, and the stone men of the Sorrows. Though he had never seen a victim with his own eyes, he recalled the accounts: skin hardening, keratin growths, the slow march into petrified death. The maiden's affliction resembled it, but was not the same. Grayscale ended in lifeless stone. But the monsters he had fought, those gaping maws filled with jagged fangs, those long, slithering tongues that feasted on brain matter, were not petrified at all. They had transformed into something far worse. He was still reeling from the comparison when a wave of putrid stench suddenly invaded his nose. Something was here. Close. Quen's hair bristled. Instinct took over, he snapped his head upward. A thick, foul drop of saliva splattered onto the ash at his feet. His stomach dropped. Following the line of its fall, his eyes shot upward. And there it was. A creature covered in earth-brown scales clung to a massive branch directly above him, its body sprawled like some monstrous lizard. Its grotesque head hung low, pitted scales stretching over its face. Crimson vertical pupils fixed unblinkingly on him below, while its thin, sinuous tongue flickered, dripping strands of reeking saliva. Its limbs were taut, claws buried deep in deadwood, body coiled like a bowstring drawn to its limit. It was ready to strike. And its target was the top of Quen's head. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 7. The Maiden. Whoosh. The yellow-scaled beast launched itself with explosive force, plunging straight down from a branch several meters high. Life and death hung in the balance. A sharp gleam flashed in Quen's eyes. Perfect. Time to test this new power. Ha! With a low roar bursting from his chest, Quen did not retreat but instead advanced, meeting the monster's dive head-on. He drew a massive breath, his chest swelling visibly with astonishing speed. Dragon flame breath. Boom. A blazing crimson column of fire, as thick as a barrel, erupted from Quen's open mouth. The flame swelled the instant it left him, expanding into a searing fireball more than a meter across. The heat was so intense it stung the skin, and the surrounding mist vanished in an instant. The yellow-scaled monster never even managed a full roar before the fireball swallowed it whole. Scree. A shrill scream burst from the heart of the flames as the creature writhed, its body turning into a tumbling inferno. Quen kept channeling magic, sustaining the blaze. He felt the energy, this force the system called magic, draining steadily, second by second. The deep crimson fire raged outward, roaring as it licked at the air. Heat radiated from him in a violent wave, warping the air itself. The brittle, dead trees around him caught fire at once, flames spreading madly until the silent forest became a roaring sea of fire. 6 long seconds passed before the monster's agonized wails were consumed entirely by the blaze. Quen closed his mouth slowly, the final ember dying on his lips. Only a smoking carcass remained on the ground, its charred limbs frozen in the grotesque pose of its last struggle, reeking of burnt flesh. He focused, waiting, but no trace of the familiar, life-filled dragon's soul emerged from the corpse. Disappointment pricked at him. The system had said a magical creature's death only gave a chance of yielding a dragon's soul. This time, he had not been so lucky. Ah! A terrified cry rang out from the direction of the boiling spring. Quen spun toward the sound. The silver-gold-haired maiden, clearly startled by the thunderous blast and towering flames, was scrambling to escape. She had hastily thrown on a gray-green robe, but her flight was already cut short. 3 scaled monsters, larger and more muscular than the yellow-scaled one, their bodies sheathed in dark green plates, had appeared to block her path. Their crimson eyes fixed hungrily on her, as if her blood were the sweetest prize. Cornered against a jagged boulder, she clutched a bone dagger in trembling hands. Her amethyst left eye brimmed with despair. Quen hesitated, weighing his options. In Valyria, caution was survival. What if she was with them? But when he saw the monsters, bloodthirst fixed squarely on her, he dismissed the thought. Another idea struck him. If she was indeed a survivor, she might know something of the ruins. And killing these beasts could yield the dragon's souls he craved. After a moment's pause, he decided to intervene. Stepping from the burning tree line, Quen advanced with steady strides, his blood-stained sword in hand. His gaze flicked warily between the three snarling beasts and the maiden herself, ready for treachery. In the Westeros common tongue, he called out. I am an explorer who strayed into this place. Are you a resident of Valyria? His sudden appearance only seemed to terrify her further. She shrank back against the stone, then quickly swept a lock of silver-gold hair across her right cheek, trying to hide the scaled half of her face. Quen noted her reaction closely. She didn't understand him, but she showed no sign of hostility. That was enough for now. He would deal with the monsters first, then press her for answers. The last beast had yielded nothing. He intended to make up for it with these three. The Inkreen monsters were furious. Their prey had not fled. Instead, he had stepped forward to face them. Their scaled faces twisted into grotesque snarls, fangs jutting out as guttural growls rumbled from deep in their throats. Without a hint of hesitation, the three beasts lunged at Quen from different directions at once. Quen's eyes sharpened. Instead of retreating, he stepped forward. Just as the creatures closed in, their stench thick in his lungs, a hotter, fiercer burst of crimson dragonflame erupted from his mouth. The blaze carried not only searing heat but crushing force, sweeping outward like an enraged fire dragon. The two monsters in the lead took the full impact, blasted backward by the torrent of fire and shockwave. They slammed into burning deadwood and were instantly consumed by the flames. Their shrieks were agonizing, tearing through the air. The third, a moment slower, was caught by the edge of the blaze. Half its body ignited, and it writhed on the ground in burning agony before falling silent, reduced to a smoldering corpse beside the others. Thick smoke curled upward as firelight lit Quen's composed face and glinted in the maiden's violet eyes, still wide with fright. From the three charred bodies, three cold, pure strands of life essence rose soundlessly and sank into Quen's body. A thrill surged through him. He dove into his consciousness to sense the changes in his blood and magic. Dragon bloodline purity, 0.17%. Magic, 554 1740ths. With the 800 dragons soul gained earlier, fighting alongside Gerion and the others, plus the 300 just now, his purity had quietly climbed to 0.17%. His maximum magic had reached 1740. Yet the rate at which he drew ambient magic into himself lagged far behind the rate at which his capacity grew through dragons' souls. His reserves were still dangerously low. Those two uses of dragonflame breath had cost relatively little, only a point of magic per second in human form, little more than 20 total. Manageable. But his regeneration was pitifully slow. Quen frowned. At this pace, his magic was no more than a trickle, nowhere near enough for greater dangers ahead, let alone the devastating ultimate skill. He needed a true source of replenishment, something vast and fast. Otherwise, his swollen reserves meant nothing without ammunition. He'd be nothing more than prey in these ruins. Drawing himself back to the present, he looked at the maiden. She had calmed a little, but her amethyst eye still shimmered with lingering fear and intense curiosity as she watched him timidly. Quen softened his expression, trying to appear unthreatening, and spoke slowly in the common tongue of Westeros. Hello. My name is Quen. I come from the distant east, from Yiti. I am an explorer. The girl blinked, her long silver-gold lashes fluttering like butterfly wings. She clearly didn't understand, confusion clouding her face. She began speaking quickly in a melodic, complex tongue, her hands gesturing urgently in an effort to make herself understood. The language was strange, layered, unlike common or any tongue Quen had heard before. He spread his hands helplessly. He couldn't understand a word. In this land of constant peril, language itself was proving the greatest barrier. The girl hesitated, then seemed to reach a decision. She stepped closer. Before Quen could react, she reached out with a slender, pale hand, soft but faintly calloused, and gently took his left hand. Then, firmly but gently, she pressed his palm against her chest, directly over her heart. Warmth, smooth and soft beneath the rough fabric of her robe, pulsed against his hand. Her heartbeat was rapid and strong. A blush flared on her flawless cheek, pink blooming like dawn against snow. She lifted her deep purple eyes to his, lips parting as she spoke softly. Her voice brushed his ear like silk, carrying a subtle, enchanting power. The instant the sound reached him, meaning bloomed clear in his mind, bypassing words entirely, as if her thoughts had taken root in his own. Through touch and thought, I can speak with you. My name is Janice. Thank you for saving me. 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 8. Ghost Grass. Telepathy. Lo Quen's heart jolted. Not only could this maiden survive in a land cursed and crawling with monsters, she even possessed such a remarkable gift. He forced down his astonishment and shaped a clear reply in his mind. My name is Lo Quen. I come from the further east, from Yiti. As you can see, I am an explorer who strayed into this place. At the same time, he felt his thoughts flowing across the contact of their joined hands. Janice's beautiful left eye curved into a crescent, as if she understood. She tried to pronounce his name, but it came out clumsy and broken. Lo, Quen. She had twisted it into 4 awkward syllables, strange and foreign on her tongue. Lo Quen almost laughed, shaking his head before correcting her mentally. It's Lo Quen. Lo is my family name. In the ancient tongue of the East, it means golden blade. Quen is my given name, meaning hidden strength, or concealed edge. He explained in the simplest way he could. A flicker of realization lit Janice's eyes, as if she had just unraveled a riddle. Her gaze quickly sharpened with curiosity as she asked in his mind, Wizard, the flame you summoned before, was that magic? Clearly, the dragonfire that had incinerated the beast had left a deep impression. She even addressed him with respect. Lo Quen answered at once, gentle but firm in correction, Janice, don't call me Lord. My house is not noble in Yiti, and my name is little known. Just call me Lo Quen. That was no lie. In his memories, the Golden Empire of Yiti had never been ruled by a dynasty of his name. As for the Great Empire of the Dawn, it lingered only in legend, with no record of the God Emperor's bloodline. He paused, then added a careful explanation. As for that flame, yes, it is magic. It mimics the power of dragon's breath. You may call it false dragonfire. He would not reveal his true trump card, his power to become a dragon. Better to let her think him merely a wielder of fire magic. In these ruins, the identity of a wizard, capable of defending himself, might inspire more respect, or fear, than that of a wandering adventurer. Tell me, he asked after a moment, why are you here? Are you a native of these ruins of Valyria? I am from Tyria, a few days' journey from here. I came with my sister to search for ghost grass. But near here, we ran into many Scalaclaws. My sister drew them off so I could escape. We were separated, so I waited here for her to return. Janice spoke slowly, but her words carried weight. Lo Quen's mind reeled. So the stories were true. There were still natives of Valyria, and Janice had a sister. The Scalaclaws you mentioned, those were the creatures I burned. Janice nodded. That is what we call them. They were once men of this land. But during the doom centuries ago, the blood magic in the air twisted them, turning them into what you saw. In your right cheek. Janice caught his gaze fixed on her scarred side. Her slender body flinched as if pricked. Her left hand clutched tighter over the scaled flesh, knuckles whitening. Her beautiful left eye dropped beneath long lashes, heavy with shame. My face too is cursed. Every child born beneath the ashes tainted by blood magic. We are born with scales. As we grow, they spread, until they devour us. Her voice was soft, tinged with sorrow. Lo Quen's chest tightened. So every survivor of Valyria was doomed to become one of those ravenous monsters. Not wanting to linger on the wound, he shifted the subject. Could you show me the ghost grass you were looking for? Her mention of ghost grass had startled him. He needed to see if it was what he thought. Ghost grass, an eerie plant of the shadow lands far to the east of Essos. It was said to grow taller than mounted riders, its stalks pale as milky glass. The Dothraki held it in awe and dread alike. They whispered that cursed souls gave the grass its faint glow, and foretold that one day this pallid deathgrass would cover the whole world. If Janice spoke of the same thing, then how could it grow here, in the ruins of Valyria? Janice caught the curiosity in Lo Quen's eyes, hesitated, then gave a small nod. She pointed through the mist and spoke into his mind. That way, not far. That's where my sister and I were separated. Sure enough, as she had said, they hadn't gone more than a mile before the landscape abruptly changed. At the foot of a sloping hill stretched a gray-white ocean, replacing the dead, silent forest of withered trees. Countless tall, ghostly pale stalks grew in dense clusters, their stems straight, most rising higher than 2 meters, crowned with fine, equally pallid tassels. They swayed endlessly in the fog, rustling with a sound like 1,000 whispering spirits. That sickly, unnatural pallor stood in stark, eerie contrast to the charred, lifeless trees around them, radiating an ominous presence. Ghost grass, the death omen of the Shadow Lands, had here, in the cursed ruins of Valyria, formed a vast and terrible sea. Quen stepped cautiously to the edge, careful to avoid the leaves that seemed supple but might cut like blades. He reached out and grasped a stalk as thick as his wrist. It was icy to the touch, its texture hard and smooth, like polished pale glass. But the moment his fingers closed around it, something changed. A surge of pure, concentrated magical energy jolted out of the stalk like a dormant current suddenly unleashed. It shot up his arm and poured ceaselessly into his body. Quen stiffened, his whole frame shuddering. On the panel before his eyes, the number for magic rose by 1. This ghost grass held raw magic that could be drawn directly into him. He looked sharply down. The stalk in his grip, which moments ago had glimmered with a faint milky glow, now dimmed rapidly, its light snuffed out as the energy drained away. Its pale, jade-like skin dulled to a lifeless gray-brown. Thin cracks spread like a spider's web across its surface. The once taut, vibrant stalk shriveled, brittle and hollow, as if every trace of life had been sucked from it in the span of a few breaths. Quen released his hold, and the husk of ghost grass crumbled soundlessly, collapsing into a small pile of dead powder. A chilling thought struck him. Could it be that the essence of this legendary death grass lay in nothing more than feeding on and storing the magic in the very air? 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 9. The Direbird. He lifted his head, staring at the sea of gray-white grass rolling silently in the mist. His eyes could no longer contain the ecstatic light blazing within them. Magic. Endless magic. This was no cursed deathgrass, it was a gift from the heavens, a fountain of power placed in his path. With this near-limitless field of ghost grass, his flaw of slow recovery would vanish. An endless stream of magic meant longer battles, and the freedom to wield his ultimate skill again and again. Quen forced down the restless thrill in his chest and chose to restore his strength first. He crouched and yanked up several stalks of ghost grass as thick as his wrist. Cold, lifeless yet pure energy coursed up his arm into his body, his magic count steadily climbing. +1, +1, +1. Every stalk he touched dulled and withered in the same way, its glow fading, its color turning gray, until it crumbled into dust once its power was drained. Beside him, Janice watched, baffled. To her eyes, he looked like some tireless farmer crouched in the grass, swiftly harvesting stalk after stalk. Confusion was written plain across her young face. She couldn't fathom why this young wizard from the east was so obsessed with plants used mainly for rituals in Tyria. But she was obedient and did not disturb him, only standing quietly at his side while keeping a wary watch on the fog all around. Then, screech. A sharp, piercing cry shattered the sky above. This time, it was clearer. Closer. The moment the sound reached him, Quen's face changed at once. Beside him, Janice went pale as death. Terror filled her beautiful left eye, and her delicate body trembled beyond her control. Quen knew that cry all too well. The 100-foot, 3-headed, purple-feathered monstrosity that had appeared on the Dragonlord. His gaze flicked once toward the swaying sea of pale grass, reluctant, but survival cut short all hesitation. He bent low, one arm snatching up a great handful of stalks like lightning, even biting down on a bundle between his teeth, caring nothing for appearances. With his other hand, he seized Janice's arm and barked, "Go!" Without a second's pause, he wheeled and sprinted toward the deadwood forest. Screech. The second shriek tore open the air almost above his head. A vast shadow swallowed the land, the dense fog ripped apart by furious gales. Beneath the rolling clouds, the colossal form of the 3-headed purple-feathered beast loomed clear, blotting out the heavens. 6 blood-red eyes blazed like stars of the abyss, locked unerringly on the tiny figures fleeing below. The distance between hunter and prey was no more than a breath. Quen's face went white as he glanced down at the boundless darkness beneath the wingspan. His arms clamped around Janice's slender waist like iron, lifting her clean off the ground. Then, unleashing speed and strength that defied belief, he surged forward like a loosed war arrow, darting through twisted trees and over rough ground with impossible swiftness. They ran at a breakneck pace for what felt like forever, but still the purple-feathered horror clung to them. It shadowed Quen alone, trailing above him like a kite on a string, waiting for him to falter, to dive and smash his skull with one strike of its beak. Quen vaulted over a low rise. The ground beneath his feet smoothed, flattening into the basin of a valley. But the sight that greeted him made his scalp prickle even in the frenzy of flight. At the bottom of the valley, massive blackened trees lay toppled in heaps, some still smoldering, their dying crackles like mournful wails. The firelight danced across a field of corpses. Not human corpses, scaled beasts. Hundreds of them, strewn in every direction. Each grotesquely slain. Some hacked clean in half, entrails spilling across the dirt. Some pierced through skull or heart. Most blown apart or charred, twisted into black husks by fire and explosion. The air reeked with the stench of blood and scorched flesh, thick enough to sicken. The valley had only just borne witness to a slaughter. At the sight, a gleam of joy flashed in Quen's eyes. This place, this field of death, was treasure beyond imagining. From the fresh corpses drifted faint wisps of dragon's soul essence, still lingering, not yet dispersed. A gift from the gods. Exhilaration surged through him. Even as he ran, he cast his will wide, sweeping across every fresh carcass within reach. Absorb. 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 Surges of cold, potent vitality rushed into him like 1,000 rivers pouring into the sea. He could feel it clearly. The unseen gauge of his dragon bloodline purity was soaring within him at a speed unlike anything before. Every wisp he absorbed meant another surge of strength. By his rough estimate, there were more than 100 corpses scattered across this battlefield. The vast majority had released dragon's soul, granting him an unprecedented rise in purity. And while he greedily drew in dragon's soul, the ghost grass clutched in his arms was feeding him magic without pause, patch after patch withering away. Dragon's soul and magic, flourishing together. Just as Quen reveled in the intoxicating rush of his growing power, the shadow of death above suddenly crashed down. Screech. The piercing cry of the three-headed bird split the air, a violent gust slamming down like a hammer. It had lost patience. The massive body tucked in its wings and dove, its target clear, the two fleeing below. Quen caught the shift in shadows across the ground and knew instantly, running straight was suicide. He swerved sharply, clutching Janis tight as he bolted toward a thicket of gnarled deadwood on the right, hoping the tangled terrain might shield them from the dive. But the instant he turned, the vast shadow of purplish-red feathers swallowed him whole. A sulfur-stinking gale hit his back like a wall of stone. In his ears, the shriek of the beast's dive tore the sky apart, ghostly wails riding the wind. Too close. No way out. Alarm bells thundered in his chest as he whipped his head around. The purple-feathered monster had already collapsed its skyspanning wings, crashing into the earth less than 20 paces away. The impact shook the ground violently, dust and sulphurous mist billowing high. Its three hideous heads, each the size of a battering ram, hung low. 6 blood-red eyes burned with pure annihilation, fixing on Quen with the cruel amusement of a predator savoring its prey. 3 enormous beaks, serrated fangs jutting, opened as one. From the depths of their throats, crimson light flared, the air heating until it warped and sizzled with a dying hiss. The sulfur stench was choking. Dragonfire. It was gathering dragonfire. This three-headed purple-feathered beast could summon the very breath of dragons. Quen's face hardened in the furnace glow. 3 blazing fireballs, strong enough to vaporize him in an instant, were about to erupt, and he and Janis had nowhere left to run. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 10. The Warrior Woman. At the very brink of death. SHHHRRRK. A shriek, sharp enough to shred eardrums, as if space itself were being torn open, erupted suddenly from behind and to the side. It came so fast that the sound nearly struck at the same instant as the attack. Quen barely had time to blink before he saw it, a jet-black arrow wreathed in fire, trailing a blazing tail like a meteor ripping through the night sky. It shot forward at a speed beyond the eye's ability to follow and slammed straight into the eye of one of the monstrous bird's 3 heads. Scalding scarlet blood burst out, splattering like crushed summer fruit. The arrow punched clean through, from one eye to the other, embedding itself deep within the creature's skull. Crimson flames clinging to the shaft leapt onto the bird's purple feathers, racing upward with the wind until everything above its thick neck was burning like a torch. The once dominant beast howled in sheer agony, thrashing wildly through the deadwood, trying in vain to shake free from the fire that clung to it like maggots on bone. All it managed was to kick up clouds of ash and ignite more brittle branches. Smoke and fire roared skyward, painting the forest in a furious red glow. Quen and Janis had just thought to flee when the sound of heavy, urgent footsteps broke through the crackle of fire. Leaves and branches snapped beneath them, the clang of metal against armor ringing out from within the smoke-choked woods. Snap. Crash. Burning branches were kicked aside. A striking figure burst through the curtain of flame and smoke. Tall and lithe yet brimming with strength, she was clad in ancient, full-body armor of burnished copper, etched with spirals, strange pictographs, and lines like star paths across the night sky. In the firelight, the engravings shimmered faintly, metallic and alive. The armor fit her frame perfectly, offering both protection and a breathtaking outline of power and grace. A copper helm with nose guard and cheek plates obscured most of her face, leaving only her eyes visible, violet gems, sharp and predatory as a hawk's. In the flickering glow, they gleamed with a calm, commanding brilliance. A thick black belt girded her waist. On her left hip hung a heavy one-handed broadsword, its scabbard carved with runes. On her right, a quiver held 7 or 8 black arrows. A dagger, gleaming with cold light, was strapped to her left calf. But the weapon in her hands demanded all attention, a massive bow, over 5 feet long. Its body was a grayish-white, semi-translucent material, not metal, not wood, but like the bone of some colossal beast. Intricate runes and spirals covered it, far denser and more mysterious than those on her armor. In the firelight, they pulsed faintly with crimson light, like veins beneath skin. The bowstring, nearly transparent, shimmered silver-white when it caught the flames. With a sharp crack, the warrior slammed the bow's end into the ground. Her left hand settled on the hilt at her hip, poised to draw in an instant. Her gaze swept quickly over Janice, confirming she was unharmed. Then those cold, severe eyes locked on Quen, who still held Janice in his arm. Put down my sister, or you will not leave here alive. Her voice was muffled by the helm, but the anger and worry inside it rang clear. Janice's face lit with realization, her sister Jelena thought Quen meant her harm. She hurriedly wriggled free and pleaded, "Sister, this is Quen. He isn't a bad man. He saved me from the Scalaclaw monsters and helped me escape this chimera's pursuit." She rushed through their tale, and at last Jelena, Valkyrie-like in her bearing, allowed some of her suspicion to ease. Quen, however, was left completely adrift, unable to follow a word. And then the purple-feathered monster stirred again, a fresh shriek splitting the night. Screech. This time the sound dripped venom, thick with hatred and killing intent. All three turned to see the beast rising once more. To stop the fire from spreading, it wrenched off its own burning neck with its claws. Blood and pulped flesh gushed from a wound wide as a bowl, grotesque and horrifying. The 2 remaining blood-red eyes now blazed with a rage hot enough to burn away reason, locking unerringly onto Quen and the sisters in the distance. Janice, come with me now. Ignoring whatever Janice was saying, Jelena seized her tightly and bolted into the forest, paying no attention to Quen. Quen froze. He had thought this powerhouse of a woman would strike again, finish off the monstrous bird, and leave him to reap the rewards by claiming the dragon's soul. But seeing Jelena fleeing, it was clear his hopes had been dashed. The purple-feathered monster bird now seemed certain Jelena was the one who had fired that arrow. Its hulking body swept past Quen, ready to give chase. Quen's eyes narrowed. How could he let his prize slip away? He focused sharply on the data deep within his consciousness. Purity of dragon bloodline, 1.03%. Magic, 2654 10,340ths. During his desperate flight, he had frantically absorbed dragon souls from the battlefield. From the corpses of more than 100 scaled clawed beasts, he had drawn nearly 10,000 dragon souls. His bloodline purity had finally pierced that critical 1% threshold, and his maximum magic power had soared to 10,340 points. Even more importantly, in his mad dash he had devoured the magic of countless ghost grasses, bringing his current magic to 2,654 points. The ultimate skill, True Dragon's Descent, required 1,000 magic points to transform, with 1 point consumed every second to maintain the form. With 2,654 points, he could sustain his dragon form for nearly half an hour of battle. And with bloodline purity at 1%, his true dragon form would reach 3 meters in length. Dragon Flame Breath. A thunderous roar burst out like a sudden clap of thunder, erupting from behind the monster bird. A blazing crimson pillar of fire slammed into the defenseless hindquarters of the purple-feathered beast. Boom. The flames roared to life, the already charred and mangled feathers and flesh serving as perfect fuel. The raging inferno consumed the bird's massive hindquarters, filling the air with the stench of burning flesh and singed feathers. When the flames subsided, Quen hurled his sword with deadly precision at the bird's rear. The tremendous force sent the steel blade flying like a red-hot iron spike, driving deep into its fire-scorched tail and splattering blood high into the air. Scree! A soul-piercing shriek erupted from the monster bird's beak. The two remaining heads whipped around violently, twisting in agony and rage. Four blood-red eyes, blazing with fury, locked on the tiny human who had dared to wound it. Overwhelming wrath drowned its last shred of reason. It abandoned the vanished sisters. Both massive beaks opened wide, their throats glowing with twin orbs of searing crimson flame, and unleashed them in a torrent toward Quen. The crimson flood of fire swallowed his figure whole. The dead branches littering the ground melted instantly under the unbearable heat. Quen's silhouette vanished completely within the raging sea of flames. Would you like to support my work and access advanced chapters? Follow me on Patreon using the button below. Up to 40 chapters ahead for now. patreon.com/BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 11. Dragon vs. Bird. The savage fireball licked at the earth, reducing everything to ash. The purple-feathered beast looked down at the figures vanishing in the flames with the contempt of a king. In its venomous eyes, a flicker of human-like satisfaction gleamed. It could already imagine the terror and despair of the human who had struck at its tail, how he would scream and wail helplessly before being swallowed by the flames. Why is there no sound? At that moment, roar. A deafening, majestic dragon's roar erupted from the churning sea of fire. Unlike the monstrous bird's savage screech, this sound was deep, commanding, filled with overwhelming authority. The mocking glint in the beast's 4 fierce eyes vanished instantly, replaced by stunned disbelief. At the very center of the raging inferno, a shape swelled and transformed. The fire did not consume it, instead, the flames gathered around it like loyal subjects. The next instant, a creature wreathed in fire tore through the blazing curtain and emerged, standing proud. A dragon. Though only a little over 3 meters long, small by dragon standards, its bearing radiated elegance and raw power. Its body was sheathed in flawless, perfectly aligned scales, each one gleaming as if forged from molten gold. Reflected in the firelight, they shone with a brilliance too dazzling to behold. Its head was sleek and streamlined, its neck thick and powerful, its sturdy hind legs holding up its frame. A pair of translucent wings, still youthful yet already strong, spread wide within the flames, stirring waves of scorching heat. Most breathtaking were its eyes, like molten amber, blazing with vertical golden pupils. Those golden eyes locked coldly on the purple-feathered beast, which was frozen in shock. Within them burned not only fire, but the calm disdain of a higher intelligence. This golden young dragon was none other than Quen, revealed in his dragon form. Far off in the withered forest, Jelena fled swiftly, dragging Janice along. Suddenly, she snapped her head around. Her violet eyes fixed on the distant sea of fire, her pupils contracting sharply. She could have sworn she'd just heard a roar that shook her very soul. That deep, resonant cry didn't belong to the monstrous bird, it was a dragon's roar. But dragons had vanished centuries ago. An illusion. Jelena shook her head, forcing the thought away, and pressed on with Janice. This is, the body of a true dragon. Quen's consciousness boiled within his dragon form. He could feel the explosive strength pulsing beneath every scale, the resonance of his wings slicing through the air, the fire surging in his throat, far stronger than in his human form, and above all, the bloodline's majesty that reigned over all mortal life. But there was no time to revel in it. The enemy was right before him. Roar. The golden dragon bellowed, filled with battle fury. Its forelimbs, cloaked in fine golden scales and tipped with hooked claws, slammed into the ground, while its powerful hind legs drove against the charred earth, gouging 2 shallow pits. Like a bolt of golden lightning, the dragon shot from the flames and hurled itself at the purple-feathered beast's exposed neck. The creature was massive and terrifyingly strong, but its enormous bulk left it sluggish. It was already grievously wounded, its head half-severed, its hindquarters torn, and the agony slowed its reflexes. Stunned by the sudden appearance of the golden dragon, it faltered for a fatal instant. Crack. Quen's jaws, lined with razor fangs, clamped down on the joint beneath the beast's central head. His teeth tore through violet feathers and thick hide, sinking deep into muscle and bone. Screech. A shriek of agony burst from its beaks. The central head thrashed wildly, while the other head, burning with rage and pain, whipped around and spewed another torrent of fire at Quen. Boom. Boom. Flames engulfed him, but the expected sight of melting scales and charred flesh never came. Instead, the golden scales flared with a faint golden glow, a shield against the inferno. The searing heat crashed against his body as though striking its nemesis, its power scattered and diminished. It was the passive gift of his dragon bloodline, fire affinity granting him innate resistance to flame. Yet even that protection began to wane under the unrelenting blaze. Gradually, the fire pierced the golden shimmer and reached his scales. Black scorch marks spread across his body, and the edges of some scales curled and reddened, stabbing him with waves of pain. Quen's heart sank. He had to end this quickly. He sank his fangs deeper, dragon eyes gleaming with feral light as his jaws crushed down with terrifying force. Crunch. Crack. The sound of breaking bone rang clear. The central neck vertebrae, caught in Quen's fangs and brute strength, snapped nearly in half. Splurt. Like a burst dam, steaming blood gushed from the torn neck, drenching his head and chest. SSSS's. The scalding blood hissed as it struck his burning scales, instantly vaporizing into a foul red mist. Driven mad by pain and loss, the beast's last head let out a desperate, hysterical wail and unleashed another breath of fire. A golden gleam flashed in Quen's eyes. He wrenched free of the ruined neck and beat his battered wings, dodging aside. He circled high above, gliding and wheeling, forcing the monster to waste what strength it had left. Its wings were nearly burned bare, its body soaked in blood, its throat flames dwindling. It could only glare up as Quen mocked it from the skies. Its movements slowed, its power fading. Roar. Quen struck. His wings spread wide, his body plunged, and his chest swelled. A torrent of dragon flame, hotter and denser than any he could muster in human form, erupted from his throat. A pale golden column of fire, half a meter thick, slammed into the beast's final head and poured on relentlessly. Screech. The monster writhed, but at such close range escape was impossible. The dragon flame clung to its skull like a plague. Keratin cracked and carbonized, its eyes burst in the heat, and its flesh charred and peeled away. Its thrashing grew feeble, its wails weakening to a low moan. When Quen finally ceased his breath, the last head hung blackened and smoking, lifeless. The colossal body toppled with a thunderous crash, sending up clouds of dust. All life within it was gone. Up to 40 chapters ahead for now. patreon.com/BlurryDream. 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 12. A Rich Harvest. Quen, the golden dragon, stood beside the charred corpse of the monstrous bird, his chest rising and falling with each breath. Golden scales across his body were scorched black in many places, some cracked and seeping faint traces of golden blood. Though badly wounded, his heart surged with the exhilaration of victory. Just then, an unimaginably vast surge of life force erupted from the purple-feathered beast's corpse and poured straight into his body. A flood of power swept through Quen's limbs and bones, and deep within his bloodline came a thunderous roar of joy. His consciousness sank into the panel. Dragon bloodline purity, 2.03%. Magic, 254 20,340ths. The terrifying purple-feathered beast had yielded 10,000 dragon's soul directly, granting him a full 1% increase in bloodline purity, equivalent to slaying 100 scaled claw monsters. At the same time, his maximum magic surged by 10,000 points, soaring to a staggering 20,340. And then came an even more shocking change. Quen's body, as if injected with growth hormones, began to swell and stretch at a pace visible to the eye. His bones cracked and popped, muscles bulged, and the golden scales covering him thickened and broadened, their edges flashing with razor-sharp brilliance. In just a few breaths, the young dragon, that had once been barely 3 meters long doubled to 6. Still, small, compared to an adult dragon, yet now radiating an aura of emerging majesty. His sleek, powerful frame embodied beauty and strength, and under the faint light of the sky, his golden scales slowly regained their luster. 6 meters at just 2% purity. If I reach the legendary 33%, could I rival Black Dread, Valyrian? And at 100%. A 300-meter dragon that could end the world. Endless visions surged through his mind. But they were cut short by a sudden wave of weakness. Maintaining dragon form drained magic without pause. The fight, though short and fierce, had already cost him 1,000 points to transform. Staying in form consumed 1 point per second, not to mention the cost of dragonflame and passive skills. He checked his magic in a panic. 920,340ths. And the number was still dropping, point by point. In seconds, he would no longer be able to sustain his form. Quen didn't dare hesitate. With a thought, he dissolved True Dragon's Descent. The radiant golden light collapsed inward, his massive frame shrinking and twisting like a fading illusion. In the blink of an eye, a human figure stood where the dragon had been, Quen, back in his own body. But a breeze, still carrying the tang of sulfur, swept over him, and he shivered. Glancing down, his eyes widened in shock. Transforming Byrne's clothes. He stood completely bare, exposed to the cool air of the ruins. His face flushed red. Hastily, he tore strips of tendon and wing from the purple-feathered beast and fashioned a crude feather skirt, just enough to cover himself. If he ever transformed in front of thousands on the battlefield, only to revert afterward, wouldn't that make him a walking sideshow? He had to find a solution. Suppressing his frustration, he did not follow Jelena and Janice's path of escape but instead turned back toward the Ghost Grass Sea. His magic was spent, his reserves dry as a riverbed. He needed to replenish before chasing the sisters. The journey back was uneventful. He stepped into the rolling green tide of the Ghost Grass Sea, his palms greedily plucking at the swaying stalks. The blades leaned toward him like iron drawn to a magnet, pouring their energy into his hands. Only when his magic surged back to its full 20,000 points did he turn and resume the pursuit. At the battlefield where he had slain the purple-feathered beast, the ground was littered with scaled claw monster corpses, proof of a fierce struggle. Jelena was the most likely one behind it. But even with her great bow that could fire arrows of flame, there was no way she had killed hundreds of them alone. She had to have allies nearby. With that thought, Quen pressed on, not daring to pause, scanning the withered forest for any sign of the sisters. Soon, the clash of steel rang through the fog ahead. Peering through the mist, he saw Jelena leading a group of copper armor soldiers. They had formed a circular shield wall around dozens of wooden carts laden with ghost grass, fighting desperately against a tide of scaled claw monsters swarming down the mountainside. The screech of steel, the roars of beasts, and the shouts of men all blended into a storm of chaos. Blood and grass fragments flew through the air. Corpses of men and monsters alike lay scattered across the ground. Quen no longer hid. He strode openly from the fog. The dragon's soul within the slain scaled claw monsters surged of their own accord into his body. Not all, of course, some yielded nothing. But his sudden appearance drew every eye, both man and beast. Quen stood there, clad only in an ugly purple feather skirt, his muscles bared. Among the armored soldiers and scaled monsters, he looked utterly out of place. A monster caught sight of Quen's exposed chest, drool dripping from its gaping jaws as it leapt at him with a violent kick. Quen raised his steel sword, knocking it back. Then he opened his mouth wide, and a blast of searing flame erupted from his throat, engulfing the creature. The monster shrieked in agony, its screams cut short within seconds as its body blackened and crumbled into charred remains. The others froze for a heartbeat, then their venomous eyes locked on him. Several abandoned their current foes, breaking from the melee to rush him instead. In an instant, more than a dozen monsters closed in. They exchanged glances, then lunged together, jaws gaping. Quen did not panic. He triggered the skill, Blazing Inferno. The air around him thickened, heavy as if pressed under crushing weight. The temperature spiked, and molten golden flames burst from the void, condensing into a meter-thick layer of armor that clung to his body. The monsters halted, fear flashing in their eyes, unwilling to come near that flesh-searing fire. But Quen wasn't about to stop. He locked onto the horde and exhaled a torrent of blazing flame, sweeping it across them in a wide arc. Before they could react, the flames consumed them whole, reducing them to smoldering husks. The battlefield fell silent. Both soldiers and beasts stared at the figure wreathed in fire, stunned that he had slain more than a dozen monsters with a single strike. Seeing Quen unleash his flame sorcery, the soldiers' morale surged. They roared and charged with renewed fury, tipping the balance of the battle at once. Jelena bore the heaviest assault, surrounded by the largest cluster of monsters. Yet her violet eyes stayed calm. With one arm she shielded Janice, while the other gripped a silver-white greatsword etched with dull, swirling runes, meeting the monsters head-on. The broad blade was like a bronze wall, keeping the savage creatures at bay. Each swing tore through the air with a piercing screech. Her sword light was cold as ice, sharp enough to slice through steel. The monsters' iron-hard scales crumbled like paper under her strikes. With each arc of her blade, a headless corpse fell, the ground at her feet already piled into a grisly mound. This woman's swordsmanship deserves the title, Divine Sword of the Maiden. Quen marveled inwardly. Jelena's slender frame hid terrifying precision, each strike perfectly aimed at joints and weaknesses. Her strength might not match his, but her mastery of the blade, the artistry and cunning of her technique, outshone the brute force of his dragon flame. With that thought, Quen flung himself back into the fray, fire blazing around him. Empowered by blazing inferno, his body seemed clad in invisible armor. The monsters dared not touch him, only to be struck down instead, eyes pierced by his blade, skulls crushed, or bodies burned alive in his fire. Though he didn't need to kill them himself to gain Dragon's soul, hastening their slaughter only worked to his advantage. At last, when the final monster fell, Quen released blazing inferno, and drew in the dragon's soul surging from the battlefield. Up to 40 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com/BlurryDream. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 13. Blood Magic Creation. Ah. Quen heard Janice cry out like a startled fawn. At the same time, he noticed the strange looks from Jelena and the warriors. Only then did he realize that his blazing inferno had burned his hastily woven feather skirt to ash. Now standing naked among piles of corpses, Janice's gasp and the soldiers' stares made him feel deeply awkward. It wasn't until Jelena tossed him a robe that he managed to cover himself. Once dressed, Quen stepped toward Janice. Since he couldn't understand High Valyrian, he had to rely on her to pass on his words. But his simple approach instantly raised the soldiers' guard. As soon as he moved closer, they lifted their swords, eyes beneath bronze helms filled with suspicion and distrust, even after fighting side by side with him moments ago. Luckily, Janice reacted quickly. Sister, let him come. He won't hurt me. You know I can always tell if someone's intentions are good or evil. Jelena knew her sister was right. Yet Quen's display of fire sorcery had been too overwhelming. The thought of him harboring designs on Janice filled her with unease. After a moment's hesitation, she yielded to her sister's plea and allowed him to approach. When Janice saw Quen safe and sound, her face lit up with joy. Quen, I'm so glad you escaped that chimera. I thought. She cut herself short, afraid her tongue might bring misfortune. Quen looked at her, thick, silver-bright hair veiled the disfigured half of her face, leaving only the beautiful left side exposed. Maybe I was just lucky, he said. I ran into the dead forest, fleeing for my life. Perhaps that beast grew tired of chasing me. He had no intention of admitting he had slain the chimera. Janice relayed his words to Jelena, only to meet her sharp gaze. Chimeras usually dwell near the 14 flames, Jelena said. They rarely come here to hunt. Something in this place must have drawn its interest. Quen's heart sank. Could that purple-feathered monster have come for him? He hid his unease and shifted the subject. Wait, you called it a chimera. Jelena didn't press the earlier point and instead had Janice translate her explanation. Chimeras were created by Valyria's sorcerers through blood magic. They're usually stitched together from parts of different creatures, but their natures are so violent they can't be controlled. In ancient times, the sorcerers kept them locked away in their laboratories on the 14 flames. When the doom struck, these horrors were released along with the other unstable products of blood magic. Quen's thoughts clicked into place. From his knowledge of the world of ice and fire, he knew Valyrian sorcerers hadn't just tamed dragons, they were obsessed with blood magic, fleshcrafting, and darker arts. They forced humans to breed with beasts, producing abominations, and combined traits of different creatures to create monsters for their use. Some even claimed that dragons themselves were born of Valyrian blood sorcery. Many of Quen's doubts unraveled with Jelena's words. The face maggots that burrowed into sailors and cooked them alive had to be modified fireworms. And the scales Janice had mentioned, the ones growing on the people of Tyria from birth until their bodies were covered, must have come from some blood magic specimen the sorcerers had once kept. Quen thanked his fortune he hadn't gone to Valyria City with Gerion, and even more that he'd escaped along the way. His suspicions were right. Valyria City was riddled with danger, the 14 flames looming nearby, devastated in the doom. He could picture it clearly, the peaks and the city crawling with horrors, while that madman Gerion still dreamed of plundering Valyria's treasures. Utter folly. Who are these people? Quen's gaze lingered on the disciplined soldiers around him. Jelena answered without hesitation. They are my warriors, the champions of Tyria. We came here to harvest ghost grass and bring it back to Tyria. Is ghost grass that important to you? Quen pressed. Ghost grass is the key ingredient our blood mages use to brew potions that slow the growth of scales. Of course it's important. As Janice relayed his endless questions, Jelena explained patiently. The word, mage, stirred Quen's curiosity. So Tyria still had blood mages. Had the doom really not wiped out those madmen? He hesitated. He had planned to travel with the sisters to Tyria, partly to uncover the secrets of Valyria's doom, partly to search for dragon eggs and Valyrian steel. But what Jelena had just revealed made him reconsider. True, his strength now was far beyond what it had been when he first arrived in the ruins. He had just absorbed a massive haul of dragon's soul, pushing his bloodline purity to 3%. Yet facing Valyria's blood mages, he could hardly claim absolute confidence in escaping unscathed. One path meant staying in the withered forest, continuing to kill scaled claw monsters to raise his purity. The other meant entering Tyria, risking danger for greater rewards. He thought for a moment, then made his decision. Hunting monsters in the forest would indeed strengthen him. But as Jelena said, chimeras rarely strayed far from Valyria city. Quen couldn't shake the feeling that the purple-feathered beast had come for him specifically. If there was one, more would surely follow. Without Jelena crippling one of its heads with her arrow, and his own desperate strike to its hindquarters, he doubted he would have slain it so easily. The wilds were simply too perilous. Tyria, at least, was a city he knew still had people. There he could search for dragon eggs. Even if he found none, he could always leave and return later to hunt again. And this might be his only legitimate chance to enter Tyria. When he voiced his wish to go, Jelena surprised him by offering no objection. She explained, the blood mage lord of Tyria has always commanded us to bring any outsiders who wander into Valyria back with us. Tyria's population is dwindling, we need outsiders to labor for us. It's tradition. And what becomes of those people? Quen asked. He didn't care much about the prospect of free labor. He simply wanted an excuse to enter Tyria. Jelena gave him a steady look. They all die. No one can survive long in the ruins of Valyria. The land is crawling with the spawn of blood magic. Tyria's blackstone walls can keep out all beasts, except parasites. Those who stumble into Tyria are eventually killed by parasitic creatures. Only residents like us, already infected, are immune. Quen's chest tightened. The memory of the face maggots still haunted him. He had no wish to die in such misery. Then a thought struck him. He had survived this long without infection. Could his dragon bloodline be shielding him? He let the thought drop and asked cautiously, aren't you afraid I might cause trouble for you in Tyria? I am a mage, after all. Having witnessed his power, Jelena frowned. I advise you not to overstep in Tyria. The blood mage lord rules there. No one stirs trouble under his gaze, not even an eastern sorcerer like you. Quen smiled faintly at the warning. Was Tyria's blood mage truly as formidable as she claimed? He doubted it. If so, why hadn't he already restored Valyria's lost glory instead of hiding behind walls, clinging to survival? Still, caution wouldn't hurt. He glanced at Jelena, who was directing her soldiers to clear the field, carrying away the bodies of Tyria's fallen warriors. Once the work was done, the company set out for Tyria. Chapter 14, Tyria. A full month passed before the group finally emerged from the vast withered forest. The path beneath their feet grew clearer, and on either side appeared more and more colossal ruins, half sunken into blackened soil. Towers that had once pierced the heavens, adorned with dragon-carved sculptures, now stood only as twisted skeletons, leaning askew toward the sky. They had reached the outer ruins of a city that was once magnificent. We're here. Jelena tugged at Quen's ash-stained sleeve, her voice low. In their time together, Quen's high Valyrian had improved quickly, well enough now for conversation. He stopped and followed Jelena's lead, peering into the depths of the fog ahead. What first came into view was a colossal gate, rising like a mountain from the earth. It was built from countless massive blocks of black stone, each etched with spiraling vortex patterns, each unimaginably vast. The gate loomed in majesty, though time had scarred its pale surface with deep black stains. Jagged cracks ran across its face, some thick with putrid green moss, adding a sense of eerie decay. On either side, ancient walls of the same black stone stretched endlessly into the mist. The walls bore the marks of devastation, pitted with impact craters, charred by fire, and ripped apart by magical blasts. Many stretches had collapsed entirely, forming slopes of broken stone. Yet what remained still rose tall, thick, and unyielding. Was this the entrance to Tyria? Quen's heart trembled. This city gate alone stood as vast and imposing as the wall. And this was only one city, in the northern reaches of the Valyrian freehold. The power and grandeur of Valyria at its height were beyond imagining. Through the slit of her helm, Jelena's violet eyes flicked toward Quen, catching the awe written on his face. She said nothing. She only raised her hand and pointed toward the base of the massive gate, an arched passage, narrow enough for only a handful to walk side by side. Set into the gate's foundation, it was like a tiny wound in the body of a giant beast. Welcome to Tyria. Her voice came through the visor, cold and even. It was impossible to tell if it was welcome or decree. They stepped out of the oppressive tunnel and into the open city. Before them stretched a colossal street, straight as an arrow, paved with slabs of white marble cut with uncanny precision. Even shrouded in a thin coat of ash, the stone still reflected a dim, leaden glow. On either side rose towering structures of white stone, built in rows as far as the eye could see. Most were square and heavy, soaring dozens of feet into the air. Traces of repair were plain, cracks filled with lime, walls patched with newer blocks. The doom had shattered this place, yet the people of Tyria had rebuilt it. As they pressed toward the city's heart, the scene changed. The grand square towers gave way to ruin and collapse. Mountains of marble blocks lay strewn and stacked in chaos, forming grim hills of rubble. Walking among them, Quen felt as though he were treading through a giant's graveyard, a silent testament to the catastrophe that had buried a once glorious civilization. Why haven't these buildings been rebuilt? Quen asked. Janice explained, these were temples. In the past, Tyria's priests came here to pray and praise the gods. Temples. Were they dedicated to Valyria's gods? All kinds. Valyria was a city-state of religious freedom. Every god in the world had a place here. Beyond the Valyrian deities, there were temples to the Lord of Light, the Seven, the Pattern Makers, the Three-Headed God, the Night Lion, and even the old gods of the forest, among others. Quen was struck by Valyria's inclusiveness. Perhaps this was the confidence of the Dragonlords. After some time, the group reached the end of the Pale Giant Street. There rose Tyria's Mage Tower, massive and dark, its base spanning 200 to 300 feet across. Its spire pierced the leaden sky, vanishing into the mist, so tall it was impossible to see where it ended. A man's voice, laced with mockery, drifted toward them. Jelena, I didn't expect you to return in one piece. Not hurt, are you? Quen turned toward the sound. From among a squad of red copper armored guards emerged a towering man, his frame immense. Like all Valyrians, he bore molten silver hair, tied neatly back to reveal his sharply cut features. At his waist hung a broad-bladed longsword with an ornate guard, its scabbard faintly glowing with runes. Most striking was the copper-colored full plate he wore, identical to Jelena's, its surface etched with intricate spirals and ancient glyphs. Spare me the pretense, Teres. Jelena's voice was cold as ice. I encountered an outsider beyond the walls. I need to report him to the Blood Mage Lord. Teres followed her gaze toward Quen. His black hair and dark eyes, so distinctly Eastern, stood out sharply amid the sea of silver and gold heads that marked the people of Tyria. He looked Quen up and down with a sneer. Another outsider. Looks like you're built for hard labor. Oh, and my men spotted a chimera to the south, along with some stirrings among the scaled claws. Best be careful if you step outside the walls, wouldn't want you dying out there. Jelena's reply was icy. Teres's face flickered with surprise, then he shook his head, voice sharp with mockery. Sorry to disappoint you, but I won't be leaving the city anytime soon. And even if I did, I wouldn't be so easily hurt. After all, I wouldn't be dragging my sister along. Jelena glared at him with venom, the air between them heavy with hostility. Just then, a pale young man in a long robe called down from the steps of the Mage Tower. The great blood mage of Tyria, Lord Osarian, commands the outsider to enter. Quen understood enough of the words and began climbing the steps. Jelena made to follow, but Teres blocked her. The blood mage ordered only him inside. Jelena frowned, then stepped back. Janice tugged at her arm. Sister, he'll be all right, won't he? Jelena stroked her head gently. Don't worry. He'll come out. But in truth, unease gnawed at her. Teres, ever ill-timed, added, and when he does, he'd better get to work. The city walls still need plenty of fortifications cleared. We can't do it all ourselves. Following the young man, Quen entered the Mage Tower. Through a series of heavy metal doors, he came at last into a vast circular hall that made his heart pound. The stone walls were set with glowing gemstones, flooding the chamber with clear, cold light. Lord Osarian asks you to wait here. He will come shortly. With that, the young man departed, leaving Quen alone. The hall was empty, bare of furniture or ornament. Only 4 enormous murals adorned the black stone walls. Quen studied them closely. The background of each was crimson. The first mural showed countless people prostrate on the ground, bowing to 7 central figures. Each wore robes of a different hue, pearl white, amber, sky blue, emerald, and deep violet. At the center towered a far larger, more imposing figure, its form split cleanly into 2 colors, black and white. What were they doing? He turned to the second mural. On the red backdrop, people stretched their strides wide, as though running, or fleeing. Terror twisted their faces. Behind them loomed a massive black square structure, smeared with jagged streaks of red, as if dripping with blood. Quen's brow furrowed. He moved on to the third. This one stood apart from the second, a gap of bare black stone left between them. The scene showed silver-haired, violet-yet figures tangled together with others wearing horned helmets, locked in obscene, grotesque poses. He studied them more carefully. The silver-haired figures were all men. The horned ones, all women. Was this the origin of Valyria? His gaze shifted to the final mural. It followed on from the horned figures, now depicting the silver-haired, violet-yet ancestors of Valyria beneath a dozen fiery volcanoes. Some wielded fire magic to carve stone, others used intricate tools to move heavy slabs of white marble, raising magnificent structures. Towering, roofless spires sprouted across the city like shoots of bamboo. White temples, vast as crouching beasts, sprawled at its core. The Dragonlord Council was filled to bursting. Dragons wheeled across the skies, while slaves dug ore from the molten rivers below. It was a vision of glory at its height. Quen stepped back, unsettled. The last 2 murals were clear enough, but the first 2 defied his understanding. Yet one detail stood out. Aside from the gap between the second and third murals, all the others were seamlessly joined. He ran his hand across the black void, smooth as glass, its chill seeping into his skin. Had there once been a mural here? And if so, what had it shown? The question whispered in his mind. It was the long night. The rasp of an ancient, withered voice sounded behind him. Quen froze, sweat breaking across his back. Chapter 15. The Blood Mage's True Face. He spun around quickly, his eyes falling on the small figure standing at the far end of the hall. A black cloak hung from the man's shoulders, its hood shadowing his face. Though his frame was short, an aura of ancient power clung to him. May I ask who you are? Quen asked cautiously. Osarian. Blood Mage of Valyria, master of this tower, and the true ruler of this city. The Blood Mage's voice rasped like sand on stone. Outsider, you have seen these histories that survived the ages. Do you not carry many questions in your heart? He walked slowly along the wall, edging closer. Quen, without betraying his unease, moved in the opposite direction, so that the 2 of them circled one another in the great chamber. Lord Osarian, Quen said as he moved, are these murals truly the history of Valyria? I always heard Valyria began as a shepherd people on the Dothraki Sea. Osarian's laugh grated like metal on metal. Hey! Valyrians descended from shepherds. That is only half the truth. Do you know why only the Dragonlord houses could tame dragons, while others could not? Quen froze. He had no answer. It is because the Dragonlord houses are the result of generations of close-blooded unions. Osarian's low voice boomed through the circular hall like a tolling bell. Long ago, the ancestors of Valyria interbred with a tribe of lamb men. It was necessity, Valyrian women were too few. Only a handful of men could wed within their own kind. The rest were forced to take mates from other races. Thus the blood of Valyria was diluted. Some lines lost the gift of dragon riding forever, while those who remained pure became the Dragonlords. The true origin of Valyria lies further east, in the great empire of the Dawn. Valyrians are the descendants of the Amethyst Empress, slain by her own brother and husband. After the long night, they fled west beyond the Bone Mountains and rebuilt their civilization with blood magic. This is the true history of Valyria. Each word struck Quen like a tremor through the earth. Valyrians, from Yiti. Descendants of the great empire of the Dawn. It made no sense. Forgive me, my lord, Quen pressed, but Valyrians look nothing like the people of Yiti. Their hair, their eyes, how could they possibly share the same origin? Osarian halted, and Quen instinctively did the same. Partly through blood magic. Partly through mixing with the peoples of the West. The great empire of the Dawn was the first to wield blood sorcery. Its emperors reshaped their own flesh, evolving their bodies and gaining extraordinary powers. With such changes came altered appearances, hair, eyes, all transformed. Then why tell me this? Quen asked. Is it only because I am from Yiti? Osarian's smile grew cold, his tone sinking into a whisper edged with menace. Because I have been waiting for you. You, the outsider from the east. In the Blackstone, I saw your coming to Tyria. I saw you wield Lightbringer to end the long night anew. You are to become the prophesied Azor Ahai. And that is my only chance at rebirth. He pulled back his hood. The face revealed was not human. It was a skull-like visage, stretched with pale, withered skin, more lizard than man. Sunken sockets glowed with crimson bestial eyes. Where a nose should have been, only two tiny slits remained. His jaw jutted forward grotesquely, lips stiff and lifeless, as though they had never known expression. Most horrifying of all, when his hands slipped from the folds of his cloak, they were covered in thick, dark gold scales. The edges gleamed with a metallic hardness, yet they carried the stiffness of something long decayed. This was no man. He was a scaled claw monster. Quen's heart dropped as the great doors behind Osarian creaked open. From the shadows poured countless more creatures identical to him, their blood-red eyes burning with venom as they fixed on him. These are the Scalaclaws I command with blood magic, stitched together from my own flesh. This fight won't last long. If you surrender quietly, I'll see to it you suffer less. Once I strip away your soul, mine will slip in and claim your body. My vessel is already at its limit, yours will become my new host. Don't worry, if you die, I'll simply raise you as a puppet with sorcery and continue the work. Even if you're left maimed, I'll stitch you a flawless body, and at last, I'll be free of this place. Osarian smiled mockingly, as though speaking of something trivial. Quen's brow tightened, his heart filled with curses. This bastard meant to seize his body. There was no time to think further. The Scalaclaws, as if hearing their master's command, launched forward with powerful leaps. Their claws spread wide, gleaming silver with a deadly chill. Quen stayed calm. These creatures no longer posed any real threat, they were little more than fodder for harvesting dragon spirits. He unleashed, blazing inferno, spewing dragonflame breath from his throat. Rivers of fire, hot as molten lava, poured across the flesh-rot beasts. The scorching heat blackened and curled their once proud scales. The Scalaclaws shrieked sharply as they fell from the air, flames clinging to them like maggots burrowing into bone. The fire crackled and hissed without end, filling the circular hall with the acrid stench of charred flesh. Osarian wasn't surprised in the least. Instead, he pressed his hand against a section of the wall. At once, the floor of the chamber shuddered violently, as though rocked by an earthquake. The black stone tiles split apart, and a vast, lightless pit yawned open before Quen. Its depth could not be seen, but the icy draft rising from within reeked of blood and decay. 3 pairs of crimson, predatory eyes flickered in the abyss. Under the glow of the gemstones, Quen saw it clearly. A colossal beast, 30 feet tall. It had the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and a tail formed from a giant serpent. From its torso jutted yet another goat's head, grotesque and unnatural. The 3 pairs of crimson eyes each belonged to one of its misshapen heads. Another flesh-stitched chimera. Quen's face darkened. He hadn't expected Osarian to craft not only Scalaclaws, but such an abomination as well. Though smaller than the purple-feathered bird, he hadn't slain that one by his strength alone. And birds, with their feathers, had weak points to exploit. This chimera's body was sparsely furred, its corded muscles laid bare. Osarian gazed at it in mad reverence. A chimera, behold the terror of flesh stitching. Do you see it? This is the power of a blood mage. Ah, if only I'd had more time. I could have resurrected even the dragons long thought extinct. His voice tore raw from his throat, strange and manic. The chimera's 3 heads glared at Quen, jaws opening wide as crimson firelight built in their throats. Outside the tower, Jelena and Teres still stood off. Jelena was resolute, she would wait for Quen. It wasn't that she feared Teres would actually drag him off to clear the walls. What worried her was what might happen to him inside. After all, she'd promised her sister he would return unharmed. Just then, deep horn blasts rolled from the direction of Tyria's blackstone walls. Jelena and Teres' faces changed at once. They exchanged a glance, wasted no words, and quickly marshaled their men toward the walls. Atop the blackstone ramparts, the guard who had blown the horn still stared in disbelief. Terror twisted his face as he peered into the fog. A vast, endless black sea was advancing, each shadowy figure moving in grim unison. It was the Scalaclaw Legion, marching in perfect order toward Tyria. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 16. Battle at the Tower. Flames licked the air, slamming waves of searing heat against Quen's face. He rolled hard to the side, the hem of his robe catching the edge of the dragonfire and disintegrating into blackened scraps, leaving the pale flesh beneath exposed. Fighting a chimera always meant ruined clothes, he thought grimly. His eyes flicked to the vaulted dome overhead as he weighed his options. The hall might seem vast to men, but to one who could take the form of a dragon, it was stifling. A dragon's strength came from the sky, from the freedom of its wings stirring storms. Inside this stone cage, there was no hope of dodging the chimera's torrents of destruction. And with the blood mage's traps laid who knew where, staying here was suicide. Slipping between the chimera's fiery strikes, Quen gathered the dragon souls from the fallen Scalaclaws, darting through the gaps in the flames as though dancing on the edge of a blade. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of Osarian standing beneath the massive stone arch he'd passed on entering the door. An idea struck him at once. If he could break free into the open, he could take to the skies and dismantle the beast at will. His feet slammed against the cold stone floor, propelling him like a shadow along the hall's edge. Behind him, the chimera's lions roar, goats bleat, and serpents hiss merged into a bone-shaking cacophony. A torrent of fire followed, the greedy tongue of hell itself lashing hungrily at his back. Heat scalded his skin, but thanks to his fire affinity talent, the flames only boiled the sweat from his pores, leaving tiny crystals of salt in their place. Enough! You wretched beast! Osarian's voice cracked, shrill with fear, cutting through the roar of flames. Kill him! Now! The chimera's lion head whipped toward its master, molten red light churning in its throat. The roar that followed was deafening, steeped in savagery. It was no answer, it was a warning. Osarian staggered back, blood draining from his gaunt face. The chimera was no dragon to be tamed. Its nature was fury, its moods merciless. By then, Quen was already at the stone arch, loosing forward like an arrow from the string. The chimera lunged after him. Its serpentine tail curved forward, fangs bared to swallow him whole. Quen spat a blast of dragonfire. The blaze forced the snake's head to recoil. Seizing the moment, he dove through the archway, only to find the long, broad corridor to the exit barred by a massive black stone gate, thick and unyielding. The old bastard had planned for this. His gaze swept the shadows like a blade. To the left, a spiral stair wound upward like a coiled serpent, vanishing into the tower's darkness above. Without hesitation, he bolted for it. The stairway was vast, 50, 60 feet across, faint light glinting on the ancient stone, the air thick with mildew. Plenty wide enough for the chimera to come charging after. Behind him, its roars and fiery blasts thundered closer, every strike making the stair quake beneath his feet. Quen pushed his dragon blood to the limit, racing upward through the endless spiral. The tower's height defied belief. He couldn't tell how long he'd been running, only that the steps seemed to stretch into infinity. Yet every 100 strides, he noticed narrow windows carved into the outer wall, tall as 2 men. Through them, frigid winds howled, dragging pale mist into the stairwell, whipping his robes about him. At one such window he stopped, glancing out. The city of Tyria lay smothered in rolling fog, its buildings reduced to faint, ghostly outlines. The black walls and colossal gates that had once weighed on his chest like iron shrank to a faint, dark line far below. Quen drew a sharp breath. He was already thousands of feet above the ground. How else could walls so vast appear so small? Roar. From the depths of the spiral stair below came the chimera's roar, so furious it shook the air. A wave of crimson flame surged upward, flooding the stairwell with firelight. The ancient stone walls glowed red as the stench of sulfur drowned out the mold and damp. It was coming. On all fours, its corded muscles bulged in the shadows, crimson veins pulsing beneath taut skin. 6 eyes, burning like coals, locked onto Quen by the window, eyes brimming with hatred and an endless hunger to kill. In its throats, molten light swelled, death itself gathering for release. Quen stared at that glow, then at the window beside him, opening into endless fog. A wild, razor-sharp idea formed at once. A crooked, mocking smile tugged at his battle-hardened face. Just as the chimera's throats flared with crimson light, he stepped onto the windowsill, raised a hand in a deliberate wave toward the beast, and leapt into the void. RRRH. The fire died in the chimera's throat, its massive jaws freezing in shock. Its hulking frame lunged forward, 3 heads shoving and clawing to cram through the narrow stone window. The lion head thrust out, scanning the fog. The goat head rammed the wall in agitation. The serpent neck writhed furiously, stretching outward. But the only reply was silence, fog, and the shriek of icy wind. The chimera went berserk. All 3 heads roared, bleated, and shrieked at once, a cacophony of rage and helpless destruction. Whoosh! The dense fog outside churned violently, whipped into a spiraling vortex by an unseen force. A roaring updraft blasted upward from the abyss. Then, a colossal golden shadow split the mist. It shot skyward along the sheer tower wall like a spear hurled by the gods, smashing upward with thunderous force. The sheer speed sent stones cracking loose from the tower face. Before the chimera could react, the golden shadow struck. Sawtoothed jaws snapped open and clamped around the lion's neck. Crunch. Bone shattered. Blood sprayed. The lion's head loosed a scream so shrill it scarcely sounded alive, thrashing in agony. It was Quen in his true form, a golden dragon. After cutting down the Scalaclaw guards in the hall, his dragonblood purity had climbed to 3.3%, enough to sustain a 10-meter dragon form. The moment he saw the window, he'd known: use the blind spot, leap into the fog, transform, then strike from the sky. The beast had never imagined its prey was a dragon. Now the golden dragon's massive body clung to the tower's cold wall. The hooked claws at the tips of his wings gouged deep into stone, hind legs carving furrows as they braced. His jaws locked on the lion's neck, thrashing side to side, ripping through bone and sinew. Each violent jerk brought the crack of snapping vertebrae, the wet rip of torn muscle. The lion's howls faltered into choking gasps. The other two heads snapped from their shock. Bah! The goat head bellowed, its teeth gleaming. The serpent head opened wide, bearing venomous fangs. No order was needed, survival drove them. Both spewed torrents of fire hot enough to melt steel. Two blazing streams tore through the fog, the air warping and popping under the heat. Stone at the window mouth reddened, softened, and began to melt. But a golden aura flared across the dragon's scales. The flames slammed into it like waves against a cliff, their force shattered and dispersed. Fire affinity shielded him from the initial blaze, but the aura thinned with every second. This needed to end fast. Quen bit down harder, his dragon fangs piercing deeper, grinding into vertebrae with a sickening crunch. Scalding dragon blood mingled with the chimera's foul ichor, running down his jaw in steaming rivulets that vanished into the fog below. Then, with a rending crack and the final snap of spine, the lion's head tore free. The golden dragon loosed a triumphant roar that shook the sky. Releasing his grip on the wall, he beat his colossal wings, blasting gales as he soared upward. Hovering high outside the tower, he looked down at the blood-soaked window. His jaws opened wide, golden flame gathering in his throat, hotter, purer, more violent than anything the chimera could unleash. Boom! A pillar of golden flame roared down the spiral stair like divine punishment. The chimera's two remaining heads shrieked in terror. It could not touch Quen, soaring outside with ease and speed, and so it did the only thing it could: flee, scrambling deeper into the stairwell in a blind panic. Quen's cold dragon eyes tracked it unerringly, spewing fire without pause. Each burst of dragonfire landed like a hammer blow. The tower walls, once so solid, crumbled like rotted wood under the onslaught. Massive slabs of stone exploded free, exposing the stair within. Rubble tumbled endlessly into the fog-drowned abyss below. One dragon, one beast, one raining destruction from the skies, the other fleeing for its miserable life within the stone cage. The dragonfire followed the chimera's flight with lethal precision, burning and breaking all in its path. White-hot debris rained down upon the creature. Its serpent tail was already blackened and charred, stinking of burnt flesh. The goat head had one eye seared shut by molten fragments, oozing down its face like melted wax, leaving the surviving eye bloodshot with madness. Where the lion's head had been torn away, its chest was nothing but a grotesque ruin: shredded flesh, snapped vessels, glimpses of torn organs. Each desperate bound splattered the hall with foul rain. And still, the monster wrought from blood and black sorcery clung stubbornly to life. On all fours it bounded, wounded but swift, until at last it hurled itself back into the circular hall at the tower's base. Quen folded his wings and dropped down, his colossal bulk squeezing through the breach his own flames had torn wider. The ground shook with the weight of his landing. In the center of the hall, Osarian stood frozen, gaunt and motionless, his face a mask of horror and despair. The creation he had staked his pride and countless lives upon, his ultimate work, was now a ruin, drenched in blood, its body split open and stinking of death, whimpering as it crawled pitifully back to him. Then his gaze lifted, and froze. From the smoke and dust, a dragon emerged. As large as the chimera, clad in scales of resplendent gold, radiating majesty and wrath. Each step of its massive hind legs made the ground tremble. Its taloned foreclaws scraped the stone with quiet menace. Golden slit pupils, cold as twin suns, fixed upon the blood mage. Impossible. Osarian's withered lips quivered, his voice full of stunned denial. Dragons are extinct. I tried, so many times, sacrificed so much, and never could I waken one, never could I reshape one, it cannot be, it must not. His skeletal fingers twitched spasmodically, reaching as though to grasp the vision before him, the vision that shattered everything he thought he knew. Chapter 17. The Mysterious Black Stone. As he muttered in a daze, the dying chimera, reduced now to a single goat's head with one eye, suddenly flashed with a bloodthirsty gleam. It snapped its head around, its massive jaws gaping open with lightning speed, and in one gulp swallowed the emaciated Osarian whole. Gah! Osarian managed only a short, incoherent scream. The goat's teeth clamped shut like a colossal millstone, the sickening crunch of shattering bones and pulped flesh echoing clearly. Thick, dark red blood mixed with fragments of entrails spilled from the corners of its mouth, running down its jaw and pooling on the ground into a crimson puddle. After devouring the blood mage, the chimera's single eye fixed unrelentingly on Quen, its venomous glare carrying the weight of a curse. But instead of striking, it suddenly spun around and, with its last reserves of strength, hurled itself into the ominous pit yawning at the center of the hall. Quen's cold, slit pupils narrowed. This creature's behavior defied all reason. Savage and cruel enough to consume even its own creator, yet at the same time it clearly possessed a terrifying intelligence. Had he not seized the advantage, using the element of surprise during its transformation to tear off the lion's head, the outcome of this battle might have been very different. He stepped to the pit's edge. Below lay only endless darkness, filled with the roar of rushing wind stirred by the chimera's fall and its tortured wails echoing from the abyss. Without hesitation, Quen folded his wings and plunged his massive dragon body into the unknown depths. The fall lasted far longer than expected. When his heavy form finally struck the ground, the crash sent echoes rolling endlessly through the vast underground chamber. Even a dragon's eyes could pierce absolute darkness, yet what Quen beheld filled his mind with a cold dread. The cavern stretched vast as the earth's hollow core, the stench of blood so thick it seemed to cling to every breath. All around, grotesquely twisted masses of flesh hung suspended from thick iron hooks. Exposed fascia, writhing veins, and pale bones were laid bare to the frigid air, while drops of blood fell steadily, crusting the ground in layers of dark red scabs that reeked with suffocating stench. Quen fought down the nausea rising in his chest as he moved through this forest of flesh. Soon, he found his quarry. The chimera lay sprawled atop a massive black boulder deep within the cavern. Its blood glowed with an eerie crimson light, like molten lava flowing across its body. That blood seeped onto the stone's surface. Instead of spreading, it gathered as if alive, swiftly sketching a pattern that radiated pure malice. An eye, drawn entirely in blood. At the center of the giant eye, a dark awareness stirred, its cold gaze locking onto the intruder, Quen. What chilled him even more was that, as the blue dye solidified, the chimera's dreadful wounds writhed and began knitting closed before his eyes. Charred skin split away, revealing new scales beneath, thick, jet black, and glinting with metallic coldness. The most horrifying change came at its torn neck and shoulder blades. The gashes where the lion's and serpent's heads had been ripped free suddenly burst into two dense clouds of blood mist. From within, bones cracked and grew as two fleshy wings, slick with mucus, forced themselves outward. The lone goat head grew more hideous still, its fangs lengthening wildly, curving like daggers. Its horns thickened and twisted, their tips glimmering with an ominous black light. It was evolving. Drawing strength from the black stone and the blood-red eye, it was transforming into something far more terrifying. A cold dread seized Quen's dragon heart. He could not allow it to be completed. Roar. The deafening dragon's cry rang with unyielding resolve. Quen opened his massive jaws, unleashing a stream of golden dragonfire, more focused and scorching than before. Like a torrent from the sun's core, it thundered toward the chimera mid-transformation. Bah! Woo! The chimera wailed in agony. Its newly formed jet-black scales glowed red under the dragonfire's searing heat, like irons pulled from a forge. The stench of burning flesh and skin spread thick through the air. Only when the pain pushed beyond its limits did the chimera violently flap its newborn wings, rolling sideways through clouds of black smoke to escape, its movements clumsy at first. But as Quen watched, its motion quickly smoothed, faster, even, than before it was wounded. His heart sank. That black stone not only healed it, but granted it new power. Too strange. Too dangerous. Quen hesitated no longer. His massive dragon body lunged forward. At the same time, the power surging within him erupted like a volcano. Blazing Inferno. The ultimate defense and domain of dragon form. Boom. In an instant, a 5-meter radius around Quen transformed into a raging inferno. No mere armor of flame, but an absolute domain. Countless golden fire serpents whirled, shrieking as they tore and licked at everything within reach. The chimera leapt to counterattack, only to be swallowed by the storm. Its newborn scales blazed red once again, its scream of pain piercing the air as its movements slowed. Quen seized the moment. His massive claws, ripping through the air with a shrill screech, slashed toward the chimera's head. Madness flared in its single eye. The goat head snapped down, and from its mouth erupted not flame but a condensed torrent of dark crimson fire, molten and heavy like a pillar of magma. The heat was so intense that Quen's blazing inferno wavered under the impact. SSSHH. The torrent smashed against the pale golden aura cloaking his body, hissing like searing metal plunged into water. The fire affinity talent strained at its absolute limit, holding back the terrifying onslaught. Quen could feel his magic pouring out like floodwaters through a broken dam. He silently thanked his foresight, replenishing his magic with ghost grass before entering Tyria. Each dragonflame breath consumed 5 magic points per second, and sustaining blazing inferno drained 10. The chase and bombardment on the spiral stair alone had already cost him thousands. But there was no time now for cold numbers. He faced the Blood Mage's creation, bizarre, unyielding, and far more dangerous than he had imagined. Quen opened his jaws wide and, at close range, unleashed another torrent of dragonfire at the chimera's exposed neck as it spewed its own flames. At the same time, his flame-clad hind legs hammered into the chimera's relatively fragile flank, tearing deep, blackened wounds that scraped down to the bone. The chimera howled in agony, its mucus-slick wings beating wildly as it tried to pull back for a counterattack. But Quen would not allow it. Blessed with the might of the true dragon physique, his scales were harder than the chimera's newborn black armor. Every clash left deep wounds gouged into the chimera, while its strikes at best etched shallow white marks into his scales, or else were burned away by the blazing domain. More deadly still, the constant burning of blazing inferno clung to the beast like maggots on bone, sizzling as it ate away its scales and flesh, the air choked with the stench of charred meat. Bah! The chimera wailed, this time with pain and desperation. It beat its newly grown wings with all its strength. Though clumsy, the lift was enough to wrench its scarred body free of the deathgrip battle, sending it lurching upward toward the hole dragonfire had blasted open above the pit. Quen bellowed a thunderous roar, his wide, powerful wings snapping open. He soared upward in pursuit. The 2 colossal beasts burst from the tower in turn. The wind howled under Quen's wings, his speed far outstripping the chimera's ungainly flight. Realizing escape was impossible, the chimera twisted sharply in midair. Its goat head turned once more toward the golden dragon at its back, and it spat one last jet of dark crimson flame. Quen's golden eyes held no fear. He charged straight through the searing torrent. His flame-wreathed hind claws slashed forward like a reaper's scythe, ripping toward the chimera's softer belly. Rip! The sound of scales tearing rang out, followed by a spray of foul blood. The chimera let out a piercing, agonized wail, its body going rigid midair. Its single remaining eye brimmed with terror at death's approach. With no thought for anything else, it summoned the last of its strength, flapping its mangled wings. Blood poured from its wounds as it lurched upward in a desperate bid for the wizard's tower's highest point. Quen followed close behind, his golden dragon form bursting through the rolling fog to land on the frigid summit. Nothing awaited there but howling winds and an endless sea of clouds. The chimera stood with its back to the void, its lone eye locked on the descending golden dragon. A guttural growl rumbled from its throat, yet its body trembled from blood loss and agony. Its evolution had been broken. Its power was fading. It was nearly spent. Quen gave it no chance to recover. He unleashed blazing inferno, and in an instant a golden storm of flame enveloped his colossal body. With heavy, thunderous steps, radiating an aura of all-consuming destruction, he advanced. The chimera roared in despair, throwing itself forward in one last stand. But in Quen's eyes, its movements were slow, clumsy, riddled with openings. His massive claws swatted aside its bite and clamped down on its fragile neck, slamming the monster onto the cold stone of the tower's summit. Its remaining wings beat the ground in vain. Quen lowered his head, his icy dragon eyes meeting the goat head's single eye, filled with hatred and fear. Deep in his throat, destructive golden light began to blaze once more. It's over. The words, like an echo from the ancient past, faded into the wind. Boom. Dragonfire erupted point blank, like the detonation of a sun at arm's reach. A golden torrent of destruction engulfed the chimera's head. Within the flames, the goat head let out one last, shrill cry. When the fire died down, only a charred, twisted husk remained, smoke curling from its blackened form. The once ferocious beast was reduced to a twitching carcass, stinking of burnt flesh. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 18. The Rescue. A massive halo of light rose from the chimera's charred remains and surged into Quen's body. He glanced into the depths of his consciousness, his eyelids twitching. Dragon's Soul. 4.8%. Magic. 10,112 48,550. 15,000 points of Dragon's Soul. That was 5,000 more than the 10,000 he had gained from killing the purple bird beast. Yet the chimera was clearly smaller and weaker than that purple monster, so why had it yielded more Dragon's Soul? The question turned in his mind. Quen suspected it was tied to that strange black stone. The chimera had undergone some kind of evolution there. Though interrupted, it had reached a higher stage than the purple beast in a certain sense. A flicker of relief crossed him. Fortunately, he had cut the process short. If the chimera had finished its evolution, its strength would have been unimaginable. He wasted no time. His massive body turned toward the tower's edge. With a violent beat of his wings, he stirred a storm of wind and plunged down toward the city thousands of feet below. Breaking through the final veil of gray mist, a hellish sight unfolded before him. Unlike when he had first arrived, Tyria now drowned in blood and fire. White marble avenues were littered with severed limbs like broken dolls. Smashed skulls rolled into corners, their empty sockets staring blankly at the crimson sky. Quen's heart clenched at the sight. His eyes swept the carnage, those scaled claw beasts. They crouched over still-warm corpses, barbed tongues burrowing into split skulls. Sickening slurps echoed as they sucked out the viscous fluids within. The air was thick with the stench of blood and entrails. The city was burning, groaning, sinking into despair and death. Quen's dragon gaze swept down the broad steps leading from the tower's base. That too had become a slaughterhouse. Several young wizards in gray robes lay gutted, their entrails dragged out, their skulls cracked open to reveal red and white pulp. Viscous fluid seeped through the cracks of the steps, pooling into a nauseating mess. His golden vertical pupils showed no pity, only cold indifference. These lackeys of Osarian had met the end they deserved. His eyes shifted upward and caught a figure in crimson higher up the steps. Jelena. She stood like a blood-drenched bronze statue, fixed at the last steps before the tower gate, shielding Janis behind her. Her flaming sword carved searing arcs of death with every swing, cleaving and driving back the scaled claw monsters that surged at her. Her crimson armor, etched with ancient runes, shone with a harsh red light that held back their claws and fangs, though it bore charred gouges where their strikes had landed. But there were too many. Like sharks drawn by blood, they knew no fear, no fatigue, swarming in endless waves from the corpses below. They shrieked with piercing cries as they hurled themselves at that lone point of crimson. Jelena's movements grew visibly heavy, her swings slowing. Each strike came with ragged, painful gasps. Sweat and blood dripped from the rim of her helm. Her armor was not seamless, the joints and the gaps at her neck became easy targets for clawed strikes. Fresh wounds opened. Blood seeped through, staining her underclothes red. She could feel her strength ebbing rapidly, her vision blurring with blood loss and exhaustion. Cough. A violent spasm tore through her. Blood sprayed inside her visor, painting the metal mesh red before dripping down the edges. Sister. Janice's desperate cry rang out from behind her, raw with despair and helplessness. She clung to her sister's waist, her small body trembling from terror and the horrors before her. Her face was streaked with blood, whether from the monsters or Jelena herself, it was impossible to tell. Go. Jelena's hoarse voice rasped from behind the blood-soaked mask, each word tinged with the metallic tang of blood. Now, hurry. Get to the port, find a ship to Oros. With the last of her strength, she swung her sword, cutting a gap through the monsters to buy her sister a sliver of space. But Janice shook her head violently, tears and blood carving lines down her cheeks. No. I won't leave. Even if I die, I'll stay with you. Jelena met her sister's eyes, deep purple, mirrors of her own, burning with reckless determination. In that instant, the ice in her gaze melted. Hot tears welled and slipped down, mingling with blood. She said nothing more. With the last of her strength, she pushed her sister deeper behind her. Gripping the searing hilt of her sword, her violet eyes locked onto the tide of scaled claws rushing up once again, filled only with the fire of a deathwish. Then it came, a dragon's roar, vast enough to rend souls and shake the earth, thundering down from the blood-red sky like an ancient horn. And with it, the flood of destruction. Golden dragonfire poured from the heavens like molten suns, engulfing the crowded steps before Jelena with perfect precision. The roaring flames devoured dozens of scaled beasts in an instant. The unbearable heat made the air itself scream, and the stone steps glowed red before shattering under the fire. The monster writhed and twisted in the golden inferno, shrieking so piercingly it seemed to split the air. In an instant, it was reduced to blackened bones and scattering ash. A scorching wave of heat crashed over the steps like a tsunami, carrying with it the breath of total annihilation. Jelena spun around at once, pulling Janice tightly against her chest, shielding her sister beneath her breastplate and arms, using her body and armor as a bulwark. The burning gale whipped through her exposed silver-gold hair, singeing the ends into brittle curls. Her skin seared under the heat, but she did not move, pressing Janice's head firmly against her chest. The storm howled, lifting ash and broken stone from the ground. Then a vast shadow blotted out the sky, casting the blood-soaked steps into darkness. With a thunderous crash like a falling meteor, stone shattered, dust billowed, and a colossal dragon, more than 10 meters long, clad in resplendent golden scales, landed heavily before them. The cold stone floor groaned and split beneath its claws. Jelena struggled to lift her head. Through the bloodied mesh of her visor, her icy violet eyes reflected the towering golden figure. Beside her, Janice also raised her head, her wide violet eyes brimming with shock, and with a flicker of familiarity that left her trembling. Get on. The dragon's voice was deep and commanding, cutting through the crackle of fire and the dying shrieks of monsters, landing clear in the sisters' ears. Jelena froze, her mind reeling. A talking dragon. Was this a hallucination in the throes of death? It's you, Quen. Janice cried, her voice breaking with sudden, desperate hope. The golden dragon inclined its head slightly. At the same time, its cold golden eyes, sharp as blades, swept across the steps below. There, the horde of scaled claw beasts, having crushed the last resistance of the wizards, surged upward like a vast ant colony scenting blood. They hissed as they climbed, trampling over the charred remains of men and monsters alike, forming a foul torrent that poured up the steps once more. Their eyes held nothing but slaughter. Toward the dragon, they showed no fear, only unrestrained bloodlust. Now, Quen's voice rang out again, pounding against Jelena's chest. The will to survive drowned out her doubts. Gritting her teeth, she seized Janice's hand and dragged her up the dragon's massive wing joint. The scales beneath their feet burned like red-hot irons. Even through her armor, the heat was suffocating. The sisters crouched low, gripping the jagged spines along the dragon's neck. Whoosh! The golden wings thundered, sending a storm howling through the air. The surge of lift tore them from the blood-soaked steps and carried them high into the skies above the city. From above, Tyria's devastation lay bare. Quen bore them along the central marble avenue, once vibrant, now piled with corpses and crawling with monsters. The dragon's head dipped, golden eyes narrowing on the teeming swarm below, every beast raising its head to scream. His jaws parted, golden light building in his throat. In the next breath, a blinding column of dragonfire erupted, molten gold spewing forth in a torrent. The flames poured down like scalding liquid sunlight, crashing over the massed horde. The fire surged and spread along the avenue in an instant. Ignited creatures rolled and thrashed like burning effigies, their screams sharp with despair as the flames clung to them like maggots on bone. Within heartbeats, the wide street became a roaring river of pale golden fire. The blaze lit the smoke-darkened sky, casting a cruel golden glow over the dying city. Chapter 19. Emperor Orion. Quen felt the gale howl beneath his wings as his dragon eyes swept across the chaos below. Flames. Corpses. Ruins. And more scaled claws surging toward this place, so many they filled an entire legion. Such scale, such coordination could never be driven by mere beastly instinct. His memory flashed back to the ambush on the Dragon Road, when a single shrill cry had rung out and the scaled beasts surrounding them had retreated like a receding tide. There had to be a commander behind them. Circling high above, his immense form loomed like a shadow of death, spewing dragonfire without pause. Every second, hordes of scaled claws were reduced to ash in the golden blaze. On his back, Jelena clung tightly to the scorching scales, her knuckles white with strain. Watching the enemies who had slaughtered her kin writhe and burn below, her violet eyes blazed with hatred, yet deep within flickered a helpless sorrow. How she longed to be the one to strike those monsters down. Just then, as Quen's focus honed in on searching for the hidden commander. Whoosh! A piercing shriek split the air at his right, sudden and sharp. The sound raced closer at impossible speed, tearing the sky with a wail like a ghost's cry. Instinct overtook thought. His massive body shot upward in a blur, leaving only a fading afterimage. An instant later, a black shadow wreathed in crimson fire tore past where his lower belly had been, missing him by a hair's breadth. The searing wind trailing the arrow was so hot it burned against the scales of his abdomen. It vanished into the fog behind him, leaving only a fleeting crimson streak across the air. Cold sweat prickled down Quen's scales. Fury surged through him. His great head snapped toward the source of the shot, golden pupils narrowing to deadly slits as they locked onto the target. In the shadows of a plaza near the ruined tower stood a monstrous figure clad in armor. It dwarfed its kin, towering twice the height of a grown man, like an iron tower wrapped in scales. Its dark scales gleamed with a metallic sheen, covering every inch of exposed flesh. Most chilling were its eyes. Scarlet orbs, empty of life, empty of emotion, only hollow, frigid indifference. In its hands, it held a massive bone bow. The weapon was etched with countless crimson runes, writhing and pulsing as if alive. The bowstring, thin as a strand of hair, glimmered with lethal light. Dragonbone bow. Jalena's weak voice gasped in his ear. Be careful. Its arrows are steeped in blood magic. If they strike, flames will consume you from within. She panted, her voice tinged with disbelief. But such a weapon demands immense magic and time to charge. I could only loose one arrow every half-month. It shouldn't be able to. Her words stopped cold. For below, the towering commander drew a second arrow from its back, black as night. It knocked the shaft with chilling calm, its brute strength bending the massive bow until it groaned like breaking bone. The runes flared as if fed with blood, erupting in a blinding crimson light. Another killing arrow was about to fly. Whoosh! The second crimson flamed shaft tore through the air. Quen twisted hard in midair, his vast golden wings beating with crushing force, stirring a violent storm. His colossal form spun sideways with startling agility, leaving behind a blurred golden afterimage. Once more, the blood-forged arrow grazed him by a breath, scraping against his armored flank. The rushing wind scraped across his scales with a metallic screech, leaving them seared with lingering heat. Quen's golden eyes fixed unblinkingly on the monstrous archer below. Its arrows flew with terrifying precision, nearly predicting his movements before he made them. Had his soul not been that of a grown man, that second shaft would have torn his wings, or pierced his heart. A normal dragon, with only a child's mind, might dodge the first by sheer chance, but never the second. He could not allow it to fire a third. A killing frost swept through him, drowning every other thought. His wings snapped back like a bowstring drawn taut. Quen's massive head pitched downward, jaws stretched wide. Deep in his throat, golden destruction had reached its peak. It erupted like a volcano long suppressed, roaring straight toward the bow-wielding figure. Boom! The scorching dragonfire surged like an enraged golden tide, engulfing the target in an instant. Yet the expected sight of its body crumbling to ash never came. At the heart of the roaring inferno stood a towering, twisted figure, like a demon god dragged from a blazing forge. Its armor radiated an eerie glow, countless etched runes flaring violently as though awakened, holding fast against the flood of golden fire. Valyrian steel armor. Jalena's voice cut through the flames from where she clung to the dragon's back. Those symbols are runes carved with blood magic. They can diminish the power of fire. Quen's golden eyes narrowed to icy slits. Diminish dragonfire's power. A cold sneer formed in his mind. If fire cannot burn through your shell, then I'll crush you and your shell both. Without hesitation, the golden dragon hurled himself forward, straight into the sea of fire and onto the unyielding figure. At the moment of impact, his left hind claw, driving the weight and momentum of his entire body, came crashing down on the monster's chest, square against the rune-covered armor. Boom! Crack! A deafening roar split the air, the sound of steel being warped under unstoppable force. The runed chestplate caved inward, twisted deep beneath the blow. Pinned beneath Quen's massive claw, the monster let out a frenzied roar. Its arms flailed wildly, barbed claws scraping futilely at the dragon's golden scales, sparks bursting with each shrill, grating strike. Its other hand clawed desperately at its waist, reaching for its sword. Roar! Quen thundered. Without mercy, his other hind claw slammed down, crushing the monster's midsection. Crack! Splat! The sickening sound of bones shattering rang out. Gah-ah! A distorted, guttural scream tore from its chest, then its strength failed, vanishing all at once. The half-drawn sword slipped from its grasp, gleamed faintly, then clattered uselessly to the ground. Quen's jaws opened wide. Deep in his throat, golden fire blazed once more. The runes across the Valyrian steel armor flickered wildly, resisting in vain. Quen felt them weakening, the intricate sigils dimming faster with every breath of dragonfire. The armor's magic was collapsing. Pouring raw magic into his throat, he unleashed another surge of flame, hotter, fiercer. Finally, the runes went dark. The steel melted, the fire seared through the chestplate and poured inside, burning the creature to ash. Quen ceased his breath. Sulphurous smoke burst from his nostrils, spreading fast into the frozen air. Slowly, he lifted his claw, pushing aside what was left of the charred remains. Jelena slid down his searing scales, her steps faltering as though she might collapse. Fighting pain and dizziness, she staggered toward the blackened corpse. Her eyes swept across the scorched earth until they fixed on the sword. The hilt and much of the blade were blackened by heat, but not destroyed. Along the steel, faint lines of script remained. She picked it up, gazed at the markings, and a flicker of shock passed across her face. A sigh escaped her lips. Now I know who he was. Quen turned his massive head, his deep voice rumbling. Who? Orion, she said slowly. The Dragonlord who survived the doom. When he learned of Valyria's fall, he crowned himself Emperor of Valyria and led tens of thousands into the smoking sea. She paused, her tone heavy, rasping. According to the records kept in Tyria, his army landed and marched toward Valyria city. He sent only a small envoy to demand Tyria's allegiance, and Tyria refused. Orion even threatened to attack, to punish us. But then, they vanished into the road to Valyria, gone like smoke. No one ever learned what became of them. Who would have thought that centuries later, the Emperor and his army would return to Tyria like this? Her voice trembled with grief and rage. Former kin turned to monsters, their homeland reduced to ashes, the truth was unbearable. Quen had just been brooding over the fact that the creature yielded no dragon's soul. Hearing Jelena's tale, he felt a pang of solemnity. But another question gnawed at him. Why had this fallen emperor and his army, after centuries wandering the deadwood, suddenly struck Tyria now? He recalled Jelena's warning, that the purple beast would never stray far from Valyria, and unease surged within him. A dark premonition coiled in his heart. Someone was watching him. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 20. A surge of power. Quen shook off the tangled thoughts clouding his mind. Right now, only one thing mattered, growing stronger. He took the half-melted sword from Jelena's hand, its blade still faintly glowing with broken vortex-like runes. Stretching out his massive left foreclaw, he touched the sword's edge, then pressed his right foreclaw against the shattered armor still clinging to Orion's remains. From both relics, he felt a surge of pure, pent-up magic straining to burst free. The equipment was already ruined. Without a mastersmith of magical arms to repair them, they were worthless. Quen did not hesitate. He began draining the magic sealed within the sword and armor. Raw power flooded into him, pouring through the points of contact in a rushing tide. His body swelled with energy, filling him with a sharp, intoxicating exhilaration. He recalled what the panel had told him. Magic could be absorbed from the air, but also siphoned directly from enchanted objects. Valyrian weapons inscribed with blood magic runes were rare, their sigils acting as reservoirs, storing power like a mage's battery and letting mortals wield spells through steel. But as Jelena had warned, such weapons exacted a terrible price. Even trained sorcerers couldn't wield them often without paying in blood. Orion had managed 2 consecutive shots only because his warped, monstrous body was no longer bound by human limits. Quen drank deep, draining until the runes lost all light. The torrent dwindled to a trickle, then nothing at all. Their reserves were spent. He checked the panel. The 2 artifacts had yielded 5,000 points of magic. His reserves now stood at 14,000, more than he'd had before killing Orion. Nearby, Jelena retrieved the dragonbone bow and its quiver. Orion had dropped them before Quen's claw struck him down, and the flames had not marred the weapon. Quen could feel the immense power locked within it, but this he would not consume. It was a prize, not fuel. He lowered himself so Jelena could climb once more onto his back, then launched into the air, circling high above Tyria. The disappointment of not reaping Orion's dragon's soul hardened into fury, which he loosed upon the city's Scalaclaw Legion. The monsters sensed their commander's fall. Their ranks broke. Discipline collapsed into panic. Screeches of fear echoed as they stampeded toward the massive Blackstone gate. Quen blocked the skies above them, his golden fire pouring down like a flood, incinerating them by the thousands. Their cries turned to ash before they could reach the walls. He did not count the dead. He only saw the dragon's souls rising from their corpses, drifting into him one after another. The panel's numbers climbed with dizzying speed. His frame swelled larger still. The sisters clung to his back, their violet eyes wide with awe, struck dumb by the sight. Questions knotted in their hearts, but they held them for later. Quen reveled in the storm of destruction, in the flood of dragon's souls filling every cell with fire. Below, the streets of Tyria ran with blood, the last humans butchered by monsters. He spared none. Dragonfire sealed the gates, cutting off escape. He skimmed low over the avenues, his fire painting golden ruin across the canvas of the dying city. The monsters scattered in terror, burrowing into broken walls, cowering in collapsed houses, yet none escaped the judgment that fell from the sky. Golden flames raged, tearing through the dark. His magic dwindled fast, burning away with every breath of fire. By the time Tyria's streets ran empty of monsters, his reserves had fallen below 5,000. But the reward left him stunned. 120,000 dragon's soul. His bloodline purity surged to 16.8%. The golden dragon's length now stretched to 164 feet, nearly 50 meters. A size fit to be counted among the greats of Dragonlord, even in Targaryen history. Princess Rhaenys' mount, the Red Queen, Meleys, had reached only 150 to 160 feet. Quen's golden dragon already surpassed her. Amid his exhilaration, Quen noticed a troubling problem. The purer his bloodline became, the lower the chance of harvesting dragon's soul from Scaliclaw monsters. At his current purity, the probability had already dropped below half. Which meant that although he had burned over 3,000 Scaliclaws, less than half had yielded dragon's soul. He couldn't help cursing the system's stingy drop rates. Quen sighed. Relying solely on hunting Scaliclaws to raise his bloodline purity was no longer viable. As his blood grew stronger, the day would come when the chance of gaining dragon's soul from them would reach zero. He descended onto Tyria's towering blackstone walls. The cold bricks were soaked with dark blood. Guard corpses lay strewn about, fragments of shattered armor and broken blades scattered across the ground. Most had deep, fatal slashes at their necks, blood long drained and hardened into black clots. Others had their limbs torn off, their once sturdy armor ripped apart like paper. The stench of blood hung heavy in the air. Quen had no time to pray for them. He set the two sisters down. Golden light rippled, and before their held breath, his massive dragon form shrank and condensed until it became human once more. The sisters were still reeling from witnessing the miracle of transformation when fresh shock struck their faces. Ah! Janice gasped, her cheeks flushing crimson as she clapped her hands over her eyes. Damn it! Quen swore inwardly, the exhilaration of flight instantly drowned in embarrassment. He hastily snatched up a blood-stained guard's helmet, barely managing to cover himself. Jelena, by contrast, kept her composure. A warrior born, her attention fixed on sharper matters. She recalled their second meeting, when Quen had also appeared naked. She'd assumed it was some quirk of fire sorcery, never imagining he could transform into a dragon. Why can you take the shape of a dragon? Is this magic? How did you learn it? She pressed, not waiting for him to find clothing. Her barrage of questions stirred his impatience. He answered flatly, of course it's magic. Impossible. You're not Valyrian. How could you possibly know magic that transforms you into a dragon? Jelena shook her head sharply, doubt plain in her eyes. In her mind, only the Dragonlords of Valyria could command dragons. To see an Eastern sorcerer become one shattered her pride to the core. She wanted to deny it, even after witnessing it herself. Quen bristled at her cold, haughty tone, more like a noble interrogating a prisoner than someone addressing her savior. His voice chilled. Lady Jelena, don't speak to your rescuer that way. Are Valyrians the only ones allowed to study magic? As far as I know, Valyria had no such spell to become dragons, did it? Her eyes widened, realizing how cutting her words had been. Shame flickered across her face, and a faint blush rose to her cheeks. Forgive me. I was out of line. Her voice sank, heavy with fatigue and bitterness. Quen, thank you. You saved my sister's life. You're right, perhaps we Valyrians were too proud. We thought we could master magic, but in the end, it devoured us. She let go of her pride and obsession, unfastened her helm, and let the night wind tangle her hair, bright as molten silver. Staring down at the scorched ruins of her city, despair hollowed her eyes. Janice stepped softly closer to Quen, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, don't blame my sister. She's given her whole life to Tyria and to Valyria. Since the doom, the survivors have clung to the belief that one day Valyria's glory would rise again. To us, dragons are bound to Valyria itself. Every survivor has prayed for their return, hoping they would lead our people to rebuild our free cities. To outsiders, this hope may seem madness, even obsession. But to Valyrians, it's the only reason we keep going. Her voice carried sorrow, for her sister, and for all the hopes that had died. Quen nodded in silence. Janice's words cut through the haze, letting him see more clearly the crushing weight Jelena bore, and giving him deeper understanding of Osarian's madness, his willingness to sacrifice everything. For that hollow dream of Dragonlords, they had hurled themselves into the abyss. And now, the dream was broken, and the city lay in ruins. One more thing, Quen's voice cut through the heavy silence. Osarian is dead. He recounted what had transpired in the magic tower, Osarian's schemes, the birth of the Chimera, and how the blood mage was ultimately devoured by the monster he himself had created, his words cold and succinct. The sisters went pale, horror widening their eyes. They had known Osarian to be strange, but never imagined his methods could be so cruel. Suddenly, Jelena staggered. Her face drained of all color, white as paper. She clutched her mouth as violent coughs tore from her throat, dark, viscous blood spilling between her fingers. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed to her knees like a puppet with its strings cut. Sister! Janice cried in terror, throwing herself toward her. What's wrong? Jelena forced her head up, her face bloodless, crimson streaks at the corner of her lips. Her voice rasped like sand grinding against stone. I pushed the magical weapons too far fighting those monsters. The blood magic in me is out of control. Hurry, Janice, kill me with your sword. I won't become one of those mindless beasts of slaughter. Her desperate scream shattered all the strength and ice she had once held, tears streaming like a flood that drowned her former resolve. Quen's eyes sharpened instantly, locking onto her neck. On her unspale skin, gray-brown scales, cold and hard, were spreading at a pace visible to the naked eye. At once, he understood why she had stressed that the dragonbone bow could only be fired once every fortnight. The blood-soaked battle on the steps, the flaming sword in her hand, the runic-ched crimson armor, every spark of magic she had drawn on had quickened this deadly corrosion. Every surge of borrowed power had been paid for with her life. No. Sister, don't. Janice sobbed, her cries breaking into ragged gasps. She spun to Quen, clutching his arm as if it were the only driftwood in a storm-tossed sea. Her violet eyes burned with desperate pleading. Quen, please, save her. You know magic, there must be a way. I'm begging you. Quen stayed silent. He was no saint, no savior who rushed to rescue every dying soul. Least of all Jelena, who had met him with nothing but cold eyes and talk of Valyrian pride. But Janice's raw, heart-rending plea stirred something in him. He remembered when he had first arrived here, how this timid girl had led him to Ghost Grass, helping him replenish his magic for the first time. He remembered the fight against the purple monstrous bird. If not for Jelena's precise arrow, loosed at the perfect instant to shatter its skull, he likely would not be standing here now. A heavy sigh left his chest. I can save her. But there is a harsh condition. What is it? Janice's eyes lit with sudden hope, her voice urgent. Up to 40 chapters ahead for now. P. A Trient Comp. BlurryDream.